What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so today's full story video is going to be a tad bit different, and let me explain why. So just earlier on, like last week, whatever, we did a full story video about Jim Lee's X-Men run. In 1991, the X-Men got really popular. You had 5 different X-Men teams: Excalibur, X-Factor, X-Force, 2 different X-Men teams. And the reason why you had 2 different X-Men teams is because, well, the original X-Factor team had rejoined the X-Men. And when that happened, Charles Xavier had 14 different X-Men on his roster, which gave him the ability to make 2 different X-Men teams, Blue Team and Gold Team. Now, Blue Team was being led by Cyclops, and they were able to make another X-Men book just called X-Men, and that was it. And so if you're reading that book, you were following Cyclops' team on their different adventures. Now, the first 3 issues were actually written by Chris Claremont, but then he left just like that. And you had Jim Lee take over as writer and artist for the book up until issue number 11. And then he dipped out. And then you had Fabian take over for issues 12 and 13. Now, all 13 issues were kind of slowly leading into the next X-Men crossover, which is called the X-Cutioner Song. And so I want to put all 13 issues into one big video that leads up into that crossover. So today's full story video should kind of give you the idea of the early days of the 1991 X-Men series, to kind of show you guys what was the early 1990s X-Men truly like. But hey, here we go. We are finally here. We are finally going to dive into Chris Claremont's and Jim Lee's X-Men from 1991. And this was a big moment. Like, you have to understand, back in 1991, this was a huge changing point for Marvel Comics. Really a huge changing point for X-Men comics, because you now had X-Force, you had a new X-Factor team, and then you had 2 new X-Men teams that were being led by Chris Claremont, but the main book, the X-Men book, was being written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Jim Lee. Like, you had so much happening in the early stages of this era. And guys, I'm so excited that we are able to just finally dive into this. Now, today's video, we're going to cover X-Men issue number 1 through 3, because it's a 3-part story arc that really does establish a lot of things that we are going to see down the road in later books when it comes to our coverage over the X-Men. And that would be Magneto. So let me explain. When it comes to Magneto, when it came to Chris Claremont, really, he had this huge change in the character of Magneto, because at first he was the X-Men's main bad guy, right? But then under Chris Claremont, we saw Magneto go through a huge change where he became an actual hero, an actual teacher. You see, when Charles Xavier stepped down as the headmaster of the school, Magneto took over. And matter of fact, he was the leader of the X-Men, the main teacher for the New Mutants. But then after a while, we saw him go back to his old ways, but not completely. So by this point in our coverage over the X-Men, this is a guy who's just tired of the human race, because he had tried so hard to make things better for mutant kind. He tried it his ways. That did not work. He even tried it Charles Xavier's ways. And of course, that did not work either. And so he just left the Earth and went over to Asteroid M to be left alone. He made a base on the asteroid. Now, in the opening pages of the book, we can kind of see that this begins the process of pushing him back into the role of a bad guy, because in the opening pages of X-Men number 1, we do pick up with a spaceship trying to head over to the base of Asteroid M to see Magneto, except they're being followed by 2 other spaceships. Now, I want to focus on the main one that's trying to get away. And the reason why, because they're looking for Magneto because they look at Magneto as their leader. That's somebody who can actually save the mutant race. Now, the other spaceships, they're also stopped by Magneto as well. But after doing that and hearing these two mutants cry out for his help, he says, you know what? I'm going to take all 3 spaceships over to my asteroid and see if we are able to sit down and figure out what exactly is going on. But like I said, this begins the whole idea of Magneto going back into his role as the super villain. But now we have to jump over to the Soviet Union. And this is really important because there is a long history with the Soviet Union and Magneto. But that history is going to be brought up in later chapters in today's video. But we do see the Soviet Union freaking out. And the reason why, because Asteroid M floats right above their country. Like, yes, it's in space, but it's floating right above their country. And so because of their past with Magneto, they are very concerned about what he could possibly do to them, but also the rest of the world. And so they call up Washington, D.C. to begin the process of the Magneto protocols. Now, we're going to learn more about that here down the road, but just know it's really important. Now, we jump over to Nick Fury, who's talking to the President of America, and he says, hey, we might begin the Magneto protocols. But for Nick, he has a other idea to see if Magneto is actually a possible threat. And of course, he's talking about the X-Men. And so this begins the idea of having the X-Men going up against Magneto, but we're also going to see the X-Men split up into 2 different teams. Because around this point in time in Marvel Comics, you had a good chunk of X titles out there. You had Excalibur, you had X-Factor, you had X-Force, you had Wolverine. But when it came to the Uncanny X-Men, well, when X-Factor, the original X-Factor, had rejoined the X-Men, you now had 14 characters. And really, that was enough to have 2 different teams to go out there on different kind of missions and to handle things at separate times. And so this book right here kind of kicks off the idea of having X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue. So when it comes to X-Men Gold, that will be Storm's team. And Storm's team is going to be taking place in Uncanny X-Men. And yes, we're still going to continue our coverage over Uncanny X-Men as well. Now, the ones who are going to join Storm team is going to be Jean Grey, Archangel, Colossus, and Iceman. Now, for Blue team, which is Cyclops team, is going to be Wolverine, Beast, Gambit, Psylocke, and Rogue. And honestly, Blue team is a whole lot better than Gold team. Like, they are definitely stacked. But the reason why Cyclops and Storm are the 2 leaders of those 2 teams, because over the years in Marvel Comics or X-Men comics, those 2 characters were the 2 leaders of the X-Men for a very long time. First was Cyclops, and then he stepped down and Storm took over. So it only makes sense that those 2 characters would be the leaders of the 2 X-Men teams. Now, we do see the X-Men testing out their new defensive system, but it's also a way for Jim Lee to kind of show us the new outfits that most of the X-Men are going to wear from this point on until the next costume changes down the road. But later on, we see that Nick Fury had called up the X-Men. Now, this is Nick expressing the idea the Soviet Union is very worried about Magneto having his spaceship, or his asteroid M, right over their country. Now, you have Nick say, listen, they're not going to do anything at all, but they're getting very close to just pulling the trigger. But for the X-Men, they're kind of wondering, why in the world are they so afraid of Magneto? Or why are they trying to go after him for? Like, yes, there is a long history between the 2 parties, but Magneto hasn't done anything at all. The 3 spaceships that flew towards his asteroid, yes, they were destroyed, but all the people on those spaceships have survived. They're currently being kept on his asteroid at the moment. And so for the X-Men, they're kind of wondering what to do here, because 1, Magneto is being peaceful, but 2, he used to be an ally. Remember, like I said, he was the headmaster of the school. He was also the leader of the X-Men. Only recently, he has stepped away from both of those roles. And so for our heroes, they're kind of like, we need time to think about this. But getting back over to the process of seeing Magneto slowly turning into a bad guy, we jump over back to his asteroid M. Now, like I said earlier, he was able to take all the people who were in those 3 different spaceships over to his asteroid. Now, we do have 2 different crews. The ones in yellows are mutants who are trying to get away from the human race to find Magneto, to find their leader. And that would be Fabian Cortez, Anna Marie Cortez, and I forgot the third person's name. But for Fabian and also Anna Marie, they're going to be very important for this book, especially Fabian. Now, the Green Crew, they work for S.H.I.E.L.D., but they are just regular humans. And so they're very upset with Fabian and his crew because 1, they followed the crew all the way out into space, but 2, those 3 spaceships got destroyed and now they're stuck on asteroid M. And so you do have both crews fight against each other. Now, Magneto did put a barrier around his room to cancel out everyone's powers to make sure nobody actually gets hurt. Except when Magneto walks into the room, Anna Marie actually does get hurt by one of the humans. And this moment right here is really the starting point of Magneto saying, okay, you know what? Forget you humans. Like, you just attacked a mutant who was just trying to get away from you. Like, you brought her down. Even though you're telling me that you work for law enforcement, what right do you have to kill somebody who was not actually attacking you? And so for Fabian, this is also his moment because he's now telling Magneto, hey, listen, man, right now, back down on Earth, they are gathering up together, teaming up, all these different countries, getting ready to attack you, coming after you. And right now, with what you did earlier by destroying all their spaceships, they took that as a statement of war. And so now you need to give them a bigger statement to tell them that you are somebody to not mess with. And so you then have X-Men realize that Magneto is now coming down to Earth. And so you have Charles say, okay, blue team, you gotta go. And that would be Cyclops team. And so they take the Blackbird and they begin to fly over to where Magneto is at. And this begins us sitting down and discussing the long history between Magneto and also the Soviet Union. You see, when it comes to the Soviet Union, a long time ago, they tried to attack Magneto. And it was a time where Magneto was trying to get rid of all nuclear weapons across the world. And unfortunately, the Soviet Union kind of took that as a possible threat down the road and tried to take him down with nuclear missiles. Now, they were going to use a submarine that was holding some nuclear missiles and fire them at Magneto. But Magneto found the submarine and sent it to the bottom of the ocean, killing off every single person inside that submarine. But right now in the present day, he's bringing that same one right back up again. And the reason why? Because all the nuclear missiles inside that submarine can still be used if Magneto wants to. But right now, he's going to use them as a self-defense against people who might try to attack his asteroid. He said, hey, I'm not going to use it right now, but if you try anything, I will send one of these things down from my asteroid to your country. Now, while he's trying to leave, he is confronted by the X-Men. And this is really important because it really shows that the X-Men are not trying to reason with the man, trying to listen to the man. You see, as soon as they see him, they're trying to attack him because they already believe that Magneto has slipped up, that Magneto has gone back to his old ways again. Now, the only person who's really trying to talk to Magneto is Rogue. And honestly, this is a callback to some of the early days of Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men, where you basically had him establish that Rogue and Magneto had some kind of feelings for each other. And honestly, those feelings are still there. And so she's the only person trying to talk to Magneto, to reason with Magneto. But while trying to have this conversation with him, well, you had the Soviet Union try to attack Magneto, but Rogue was in the way. And so, well, she gets hurt by their attack. Now, for Magneto, that is another example that mutants will never be free, that mutants will always be a target for the human race. And so he does use one of the nuclear missiles in the upper atmosphere. And so honestly, the ground level is not seriously damaged, but he did release nuclear radiation in the sky now. But you do have Magneto retreat back to his asteroid to get away from everyone else. Now, Magneto did get hurt from his battle against the X-Men, but also because the nuke that he used. And so once he does get back to the asteroid, you do have Fabian Cortez use his powers to heal up Magneto, which is only one of his many abilities that he actually has. You see, when it comes to Fabian, he has a range of different kinds of powers. Healing is just one of them. Matter of fact, he also has the ability to enhance other mutants' powers to extreme levels. But currently, he's just trying to heal up Magneto. But we kind of see that Fabian is really upset with Magneto being hurt. Now, after Rogue was hit by the Russian planes, she crash landed in Genosha. Now, we had talked about this country before. You see, originally, Genosha was this country in Marvel Comics where they were trying to paint this picture as a perfect country, that if you go there, you never want to leave. But in reality, if you were a mutant, you were a slave. Now, recently, the X-Men were able to begin the process of turning things around in that country, where mutants are no longer slaves, that now they are free and they now have the ability to do whatever they want. Except Rogue had crash land after her conversation with Magneto, but being attacked by the Russian planes. Except when she wakes up, they tell her right now Genosha is being attacked by a group of superpower beings. And we kind of find out that it is the Acolytes. Now, this gives us our first appearance of this group. A group of characters that are going to be Magneto's followers, but also his strike team as well. Now, the reason why they are here is for two different things. First, it's Rogue. They want to see if Rogue is going to join their side, be next to Magneto, and begin the process of changing things. But also, they came here to attack Genosha, because this country, like I said before, was a country full of slaves, mutants who were slaves and being forced to do things for the human race. And so they believe this country should pay for all their past crimes, even though this is a country that's going through a huge change. Now, you have Rogue trying her best to stop them, but you know, there's too many of them. But luckily for her, the X-Men do arrive, and we do get a lot of great pages drawn by Jim Lee when it comes to our heroes fighting against the Acolytes. Now, we're also getting a small tease of the idea that there might be some kind of connection between Wolverine and also Fabian Cortez, but only a small tease, and that is really it. Now, something else I should mention is that some of the Acolytes are actually just regular humans who are being controlled by Fabian's sister Anna Marie to kind of help fill the team out. And so you have our heroes wondering, why in the world are these regular humans helping out this mutant group to attack a supposed mutant-hating nation? Either way, you have our heroes go up against the Acolytes, but then Magneto arrives. Now, the last page of the book is where you have Magneto appear. And when he does, he tells everyone to just stop. And everyone does in their tracks. And he says, listen, I'm going to tell you guys right now that these people are under my watch. I will take full responsibility for their actions today. He even says it was not him who has sent the Acolytes down to Earth to attack Genosha. They came here on their own. But I want to say that any punishment that you guys believe they deserve will not be happening at all. Only I, Magneto, can give them the punishment that they actually deserve. Because again, I will take full on responsibility for their actions. And also, they came from Asteroid M. And this is where he said Asteroid M is going to be a safe haven for all mutants around the world. If mutants around the world want to come there, they can. And they will be protected by me from the human race. Even the X-Men and Charles Xavier are welcome. And just like that, Magneto has kind of slipped back into the role of a bad guy, but again, not completely, because this is a man who just wants to protect his people. And so as we dive into X-Men number 2, we kind of see the X-Men continuing to argue with Magneto. Now, this argument is really more the idea of saying, listen, your acolytes have to pay for what they have done to Genosha, to the innocent lives lost in this country. But for Magneto, he's kind of like, why should he? Or why should they? I'm sorry. Because for Magneto, he's like, Genosha had many years of slavery, so many years of slavery on the mutant race. And so what my acolytes did may seem wrong, but for me, it was the right punishment to give to this country. Now, you have Genosha begin to attack back with their magistrate. And so you have Magneto try to defend himself, but to also take down the magistrate as well. Now, you have the X-Men fighting against the acolytes, but I want to focus on Fabian Cortez going up against Psylocke, because like I said earlier, Fabian has the ability to enhance people's powers to extreme levels. And so when he is able to touch Psylocke, he is able to take her powers to extreme levels, where she is now able to read all the minds on the entire island, in the entire country. And for Psylocke, she's not a powerful psychic like Jean Grey or Charles Xavier, but she's still up there. But also, this is just too much for her to handle on her own. Now we jump over to Nick Fury, who's having a meeting with some of the world leaders, and the world is watching what's happening in Genosha. They're watching what Magneto is doing over there. He is destroying the entire country. And so you have Genosha freaking out because thanks to the whole extension agenda where they almost went to war against America, but also show what they did to the mutant race, there were a lot of restrictions put down on Genosha by other countries. So they don't have the right resources to actually fight back against Magneto. They're calling out for help. But while they're doing that, you have these world leaders technically tell Nick Fury that it may be time to go ahead and use the Magneto protocol. I want to shift our focus back on Psylocke because, like I said, she's hearing all the minds of every single person in this country. And right now, there is a lot of hatred towards the mutant race. Now, Beast is able to get some of the crowd away from her. And you have Fabian very excited in what he was actually able to do to Psylocke. But then you have Gambit being able to knock him out. Now, for Magneto, enough is enough. He hates the idea of seeing the mutant race fighting against each other. The acolytes and him fighting against the X-Men. To him, the mutant race should be coming together and going after the human race, or going after their enemies. But as we go back to the base of the X-Men, we see Charles Xavier, Banshee, and Forge just watching and seeing what is happening over in Genosha. And for Forge and Banshee and Charles Xavier, they do know that some of the countries are actually talking about using the Magneto protocols. But the problem is Forge has no idea what those actually are. Now, for Charles Xavier, he's kind of wondering where Moira McTaggart is at, because at this point in time, her and Banshee and Forge were staying with the X-Men. And so you have Banshee say, hey, I don't know. She's not in the secure area of the school, so I should go find her. But you have Charles say, no, I'll go find her because I need to talk to her. Now, for Banshee and Forge, they're kind of worried of Charles Xavier leaving the secured area, but he wants to talk to Moira McTaggart. But getting back over to the battle with the X-Men, they're still battling against Magneto. Now, while battling against Magneto, we cannot forget that Psylocke had her powers enhanced. And so with her powers now being brought up to an all-new high of level, she was able to use her psychic knife on the mind of Magneto. Now, Magneto is a well-trained mutant. He knows how to protect his mind from different kinds of psychic attacks. Now, even though it is a powerful one, she can't completely bring him down. Now, before Rogue is able to give out the knockout punch, well, unfortunately, the entire X-Men team are turned to chrome statues by another acolyte that had arrived is a tad bit too late. An acolyte going by the name Chrome. And of course, their ability is to turn people or objects into chrome. And so with the X-Men now being statues, you didn't have Magneto say, you know what, let's go ahead and bring them over to Asteroid M, where I will decide what should be their punishment for going against us and our goals. Now, once you have Magneto being able to get back over to Asteroid M, we do learn that Fabian Cortez, while he was healing up Magneto, he found something wrong with the DNA code of Magneto. Like, there was a part of genetics that was actually engineered by someone else. And the question is, how is that possible? How was somebody able to change a part of Magneto's DNA? But apparently he does know where it could have came from. Now, we also learned that Russia had just launched a weapon into space, a plasma cannon. And this plasma cannon would have usually scared America, but now America is cheering on Russia, because right now they're going to use that weapon against Magneto. But now you have Magneto heading over to the school of Charles Xavier and also Moira Taggart. Now this is Magneto questioning Charles Xavier, questioning Moira Taggart, because he believes that they had done something to his genetics. And so he has taken them into space so that they have nowhere to run. But this is Magneto saying, I know that one of you guys did something to my genetics, did something to my DNA. Now for Charles, he has no idea what Magneto is talking about, but Moira Taggart, yeah, she does. You see, there was a point in time where Magneto was a baby. Yeah, you heard that right. We had a baby Magneto, but he was then turned back into an adult by Eric the Red. But in that short period of time where he was a baby, he was staying with Moira Taggart, which means it had to be her. She did something to him. And so you have Magneto take Charles and Moira Taggart over to Asteroid M so that she's able to explain what she had done to Magneto in the past. You see, we do learn that when Moira Taggart had Magneto when he was a baby, she kind of realized that there was something wrong with his nervous system. And so she felt like if she was able to alter it or fix it, then most likely when he would grow up, he would not become a villain once again. Now, as we all know, when it came to Eric the Red, he was able to age up Magneto back into an adult. But as we saw over time, Magneto began to become a good guy, a leader of the X-Men, a teacher for the New Mutants. And so you had Moira Taggart believe at first that what she did actually worked. But the only reason why she did that to Magneto because she was hoping to find a way to save her son. Now for Magneto, he now feels like all the moves he made over a short period of time in X-Men comics were no longer his own moves. That technically they were the moves of Moira Taggart because she changed him, she altered him. And so because of that, he said, listen, you are now going to work for me. You're going to help me make the X-Men follow my commands, follow my orders, and you better not tell me no, because if you try to tell me no, I will kill you. And so unfortunately, Moira Taggart has no choice but to go ahead and help out Magneto to make Cyclops' team follow his commands. But then we get a small glimpse of Omega Red. And this is really big because you have the general of the Soviet Union handing over this container that contains Omega Red, a character we're going to see in our next X-Men video. But while you have him handing over this container, we see him handing it over to Matsuo. Now, Matsuo is actually a member of the Hand, a ninja organization. And by this point in Marvel Comics, he's one of their higher up leaders. But apparently, he wanted Omega Red for some unknown reason. And now he has it. He tells his guys to go ahead and kill off the general as he leaves with the container containing Omega Red. But now we have to jump over to the Gold Team. Now the Gold Team, they're running a simulation trying to figure out how are they going to save the Blue Team and Charles Xavier. But while they are doing that, they didn't get a message from Nick Fury. Now this is Nick saying, hey guys, I want to tell you that the Soviet Union had launched a weapon that's basically a plasma cannon, and it has the ability to punch a hole into a planet. They plan on using that cannon on Magneto's asteroid M, which means if it does hit the asteroid, everyone on that asteroid M base is going to die, including the Blue Team and Charles Xavier. So now the Gold Team has to hurry up and find a way to save their friends before asteroid M gets blown out of space. And so getting into the third chapter for today's video, we do see, well, the X-Men heading over to Asteroid M. Now this is the Gold Team, and they're in a spaceship that's trying to not be detected by Magneto or any of his defenses at all. But we can see our heroes are kind of wondering, how in the world are they going to be able to pull something off like this? But the thing is, they have to at least try to save their teammates, to save Charles Xavier. But while they're doing that, back on the ground, you have Nick Fury talking to the different leaders who are involved with the whole Magneto protocol. And this is Nick kind of wondering, what in the world are you guys doing? Like, think about this. What if your plasma cannon does not actually destroy the asteroid? What if the asteroid just get pushed right into the Earth and then bang, you would cause severe damage to our planet? But for these leaders, they're kind of like, hey, we have to take a chance here. We have to try and see if we are able to wipe out Magneto's asteroid. Almost said aircraft there. Now we do see Fabian Cortez kind of questioning Magneto on why haven't he tried to have Charles Xavier also be under his control like the Blue Team is. But you have Magneto say, I don't want to have Charles under my control. I want to see him broken. I want to show him what I am able to do and what I did to his dream, but also to his students. Now you have Moira McTaggart once again try to talk back to Magneto by saying, listen, Charles is innocent and so is his X-Men team. The only person that you should be mad at right now is me. I was the one who was playing with your genetics. Now Magneto knows that, but he does not care. But he does get very upset that she had decided to raise her voice at him. But the problem is, in the middle of him yelling, he begins to feel weak once again. Now, there is something I did forget to mention in this story, that every once in a while, Magneto needs Fabian to heal him up. But the problem is, Fabian is not properly healing Magneto. Like, yes, he is, but he's also doing harm to Magneto's body as well. And he's doing it on purpose. Now, the reason why is not told to us until the very end of this book. But for Moira McTaggart, she realized that Fabian is helping Magneto, but also hurting Magneto. But now we are able to pick up with the Blue Team. Now, when we do, we see the Blue Team is completely under the control of Magneto, thanks to Moira McTaggart. And so you have the Blue Team just kind of hanging out. But we can also see that different members of the team are beginning to remember their past lives, but it's kind of hard for them to remember completely. And really, our first example is Rogue, who's kind of like, wait a second, something is wrong here. Now, you have the other team, the gold team for X-Men, getting close to Asteroid M. And Moira McTaggart, she saw them coming, even though they were trying their best to hide from Asteroid M and Magneto's detections. They're still being seen by Moira McTaggart. And Wolverine realized that she knows that somebody is coming very soon. And most likely, it's the other X-Men team. And so for Wolverine, he said, you know what? It's time for us to get ready to host for our visitors. Now, once you have the gold team being able to get onto Asteroid M, they do have to fight against the other X-Men team. Now, this fight is very short-lived. Like, yes, we do get a few cool pages where you have Jim Lee showing us his work on all these different X-Men characters, but you didn't have the blue team remember who they are and what they are, that they are the X-Men. They're not with Magneto at all. And so they once again realize that they're on the wrong side and they rejoin the gold team. Now, as soon as they do that, you have Magneto appear. Now, you do have Magneto once again try to make a statement. The whole idea of he was just only trying to help out the mutant kind, trying to get back at the human race for what they have done to their people. But then you have Magneto fall to the ground where he feels like something is wrong with him. And so you have Moira McTaggart say, yes, there is something wrong with you. But first, let me explain. You see, I did alter your genetics. I did change your DNA, but it could only work if you did not use your powers. And as we know, you did, which means all that time where you were the headmaster of Charles Xavier School, where you were the teacher for the New Mutants, that was you. That was your choices. It wasn't like I completely changed you and forced you into that role. That was all you, my dude. But she also says Fabian Cortez has been using you. He only heals you up to a certain point where then you require him more often because he was waiting for the right moment to make you become a martyr. You see, once you are dead, the mutant race will then rally around your death. And then they'll try to go to war with the human race. He has set everything up when it comes to Russia and their plasma cannon, you and everyone else around here. It was all Fabian Cortez. And once you have everyone realize that, homeboy dipped out. He is already on escape pod going back to Earth. And so, yeah, it was Fabian Cortez. In the plasma cannon, it does fire, and it does hit Asteroid M, and it does seem like it's going to explode. Now, you have the X-Men being able to get on their ship to head back to Earth, but Magneto and his acolytes, minus Fabian Cortez, they stay behind. They want to die on Asteroid M. And the book kind of ends with Asteroid M blowing up, and having us wondering if Magneto and his acolytes had officially died. But either way, the X-Men can now head back home to Earth. And this begins the new era of X-Men comics. But unfortunately, the new era goes on without Chris Claremont, because this was the last book he wrote for X-Men comics at this point in time in Marvel Comics. He left Marvel completely. Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the X-Men, we have reached a point where Chris Claremont had officially left the company behind. I mean, the man left in 1991, and really, that was a big year for Marvel Comics because around that time, they had 6 different X titles. You had 5 different X teams: Excalibur, X-Factor, X-Force, X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and then you had Wolverine, his solo series. That was 6 different X titles coming out in 1991. And for Chris, he didn't care. He dipped out. And so it came down to Marvel saying, you know what? Let's see if we are able to pick up where he left off at. And hopefully we can do a good job. Now, we're going to jump back over to X-Men. Issues number 4, 5, 6, and 7, because this is a 4-part story arc that is actually introducing a new character known as Omega Red. Now, this is Jim Lee saying, hey, I can write and draw. you know what, Chris gone, don't worry, we got this. Let me do a story arc. So he was the man kind of brought in Omega Red for us. It kind of gave us a whole background story of this character, but he also built on the past of Wolverine as well. And you see what I mean as we go through today's video. And so getting into X-Men issue number 4, we do pick up with a small island. Now really, this small island is actually a base for the Hand. Now we had talked about the Hand before in our other videos. The Hand is a small, not small, they're a very big ninja organization, but they usually go out of their way to worship a demon known as the Beast. Now for the Hand, there were many different factions in the actual organization, and each faction is being led by a certain kind of leader, and usually that leader has their own kind of goals they're trying to reach. And so getting over to this small island that does belong to the Hand, this is only a faction of the Hand, and they're being led by a character known as Masuo, and I really hope I pronounced that first name correctly. Now Masuo, we've seen him before, and really he is the reason why Psylocke is no longer in her original body. He was the reason why she was now placed in an Asian woman body. But for Masuo, we see him doing some kind of ritual where he is sacrificing 20 people to bring back a certain character. And that certain character is Omega Red. And this is Masuo telling Omega Red, like, hey, I brought you back to life to get something we both need. And I feel like you want revenge on the person who may know where that item could possibly be. And as soon as Masuo says that, Omega Red knows who he is talking about, Wolverine. But now we are able to jump over to the school of Charles Xavier. Now, for me, I kind of like this section a lot because we get the chance to see the X-Men have some downtime. I mean, when it came to Chris Claremont, he did this as well. Matter of fact, there was a book we covered where you had Storm and the girls kind of have a girls' night. So the X-Men usually get a book or two where they are able to have some kind of downtime. So we do see Rogue and Wolverine going up against Gambit and Jubilee in a game of basketball. Now, the problem is they're not supposed to use their powers, but Gambit is just too good in the game of basketball to the point where he ticks off Rogue and she begins to use her powers to kind of help them win the game of basketball. And so for Gambit, he's all like, well, if you are going to use your powers, then I'm gonna use my powers as well. And so we see Gambit begin to charge up the ball with his powers, which means that ball is going to explode very soon. Now, while you have the X-Men outside playing basketball, inside we do see that Moira McTaggart is having a nightmare. Now, this nightmare is a callback to our last video. You see, in our last video, we had learned that when Magneto was a baby, Moira McTaggart was left in charge to raise the young man. Except while doing that, she altered his DNA to make sure when he grows up, he'll become a good guy rather than a bad guy. Now, here's the catch though. You see, you did have a character known as Eric the Red appear. And when it came to Eric, he was able to age up Magneto back into his prime years. But shortly after, we begin to see Magneto become an actual good person. You see, when Charles went to space, he left his school behind for Magneto to take over. And you also have Magneto become the leader of the X-Men. And he taught the New Mutants for a short period of time. And so in that time period for Marvel Comics, it really did seem like Magneto was actually a good person. Now, shortly after that, he did go back into the role of a bad guy, but then he learned that his DNA was altered by Moira McTaggart. Now, her actual plan did not really work out. You see, she tells us that if it did work out, he would not been able to use his powers, but he had been using his powers, which means that the entire time that he was out there being a good guy, it was his choice. But when he found out that Moira McTaggart had altered DNA, he felt like those months, days, years, whatever, was not actually his choice. It was her choice because she played with his DNA. And so getting back over to her nightmare, she feels so guilty for what she has done to Magneto. Now you have Charles and Banshee in there trying to calm her down, but unfortunately she feels very guilty with the idea of playing with someone else's DNA. But now we jump over to Berlin, and we do pick up with Masuo. Now Masuo is having a meeting with the Von Strucker twins. Now we had talked about the Von Strucker twins before. They are the children of Baron Von Strucker, a well-known enemy of Captain America. But for the Von Strucker twins, they are mutants, but the problem is their powers only work if they have physical contact with one another. But we do see that they are meeting up with Masuo to work out some kind of plan. And apparently, for their plan to actually work, they need the help of Omega Red, who is currently being used by Masuo. But apparently, their goal is to gain immortality. And so we're kind of left to wonder, what are they actually up to? Now we do get a page where we see Gambit trying to get with Rogue. And for me personally, this was the starting point of where you had the idea of Gambit and Rogue possibly getting together. Now, we already see Rogue telling Gambit no, because as we all know, at this point in time, no one was truly able to touch her skin without some negative effects happening to them. And so she does push Gambit off of her and she flies away. But for Gambit, he likes the idea of a challenge, a woman he does care for, but also can't touch. And we do get a couple more pages where we see Morbid Taggart still freaking out about what she had done to Magneto. And you still have Banshee, who is her boyfriend at this time, trying to calm her down. But the problem is she's not trying to relax. And really, she feels like she only failed because she's only human. That part right there for me kind of like, okay, if she was a mutant, could she had actually succeeded? Either way, Banshee's still trying to calm down the lady. Now later on in the day, we do learn that Gambit is trying to take Rogue out on a date. And at first, he believed, okay, it's just going to be him and her on a date. This is going to be great. But the problem is you have Wolverine, Jubilee, and Beast like, hey, we're going to tag along as well. And you have Gambit wanting to say no, but like, he can't. He's like, fine, y'all can come along, just please don't ruin this date. Now, Gambit will try to lose them, but it's Beast and Wolverine and Jubilee. There's no way he's going to lose them at all on the way over to the restaurant. But while you have everybody leaving, we do see that Morbid Taggart had decided to lead the school of Charles Xavier. She wants to be left alone. Now, Banshee, he wants her to stay behind, stay with him and Charles and the rest of the X-Men because this man truly loves her. But unfortunately, she's all like, I can't, I gotta leave. And so we see her get in a cab. And so at the same time you have the X-Men going out on their fun night at the restaurant, she's also leaving in a cab as well. But getting back over to the X-Men, on their way over to the restaurant, well, that is when they are attacked by the Hand. Now, this is the Hand believing that they should be able to handle the X-Men. And at first, it does seem like they could actually do it because they were able to ambush our heroes, catch them off guard. But our heroes were able to get right back up on their feet and begin the process of fighting back against the Hand. But then Wolverine realized that somebody's nearby, somebody with a very familiar scent, and he can't believe that person is alive again. And when he turns around, he sees Omega Red. Now, for Omega Red, he has the ability to release these death spores into the air. And sometimes it can just make you so weak you pass out, or you could possibly die from it. But for the X-Men, they all get completely knocked out. And so now the X-Men, including Wolverine, are now going to be hostages for Masuo and Omega Red. Now, something else I do want to mention is that around this time in Marvel Comics, you had two different X-Men books. You had Uncanny X-Men and X-Men. And the reason why, because Charles had 14 different X-Men to work with. He said, you know what? I can make 2 teams. So he made Blue Team and Gold Team. Now, Blue Team was Wolverine, Gambit, Rogue, Jubilee, Cyclops, Beast, and Psylocke. The Gold Team was Storm, Jean Grey, Archangel, Colossus, and Iceman. Now, as we saw earlier, most of the Blue Team was just taken as prisoners. So that leaves Cyclops and Psylocke left behind to go save their fellow teammates. Now, luckily for them, Colossus was around. So Colossus was able to help them out to go find the others. And with the tech they have from Forge, they were able to find most of the Blue Team. And the reason why I say most is because, well, Omega Red took Wolverine somewhere else. And so you had the Hand doing the rest of the work, trying to transport the rest of the X-Men that they had captured earlier. But like I said, you do have Colossus, Cyclops, and Psylocke being able to find most of the Blue Team and being able to break them free. But after doing that, you have our heroes realize that 1, Wolverine is not there, but 2, his mask was left behind. And that right there is very confusing because when he left, he was not wearing his suit, or maybe he was underneath his street clothes. But either way, they feel like the idea of his mask being left behind could be a message saying, hey, you know what? Something bad might happen to your friend. Now, we do learn that Omega Red took Wolverine over to Berlin, and we see the 2 characters fighting against each other, but we do see that Omega Red is beating down on Wolverine. I mean, beating down on him, but they're being watched by 4 other people: Masuo, the Von Strucker twins, and Dr. Cornelius. Now, Dr. Cornelius is very important because he was part of the Weapon X program that turned Wolverine into a living weapon. And so you have all 4 characters watching this battle. But the reason why they're allowing Omega Red to beat down Wolverine is to kind of help jog his memories so that he can tell them where he had placed a certain item that they are looking for. Now, we do get a small flashback where we do learn that Wolverine was part of some kind of team, and this begins the whole idea of Wolverine being part of X-Team. Now, gonna learn more about X-Team down the road in later books, but just know that apparently X-Team was Wolverine and Sabretooth. There was somebody else, but I'm gonna save that for a tad bit later. Now, with that flashback, it's very short, but it tells us like, hey, Wolverine and Sabretooth were partners on this team called X-Team. But then we see Omega Red drag Wolverine back in the present day into a different room where you do have our bad guys here basically hook Wolverine up to some device where they're going to torture him. And the reason why, because they want this certain item, and it's very special for Omega Red, but for everybody else. And it's called the Carbonadium Synchronizer. They need this item to help with their master plan. But apparently Wolverine is the only person who knows where it could actually be at. Now, back at the X-Mansion, we do kind of get an excuse of why the Gold Team is not going to help the Blue Team out when it comes to saving Wolverine, because they have to go to the Hellfire Club. Now, we're going to cover that story arc later. That story arc is all about Bishop coming into the world of Marvel Comics, but that takes place over in Uncanny X-Men. So that removes Jean Grey, Storm, Colossus, Archangel, and Iceman as well. While the rest of the X-Men, the Blue Team, will go out of their way to go to Berlin to hopefully save Wolverine. Now, a day later, we do see Omega Red transporting Wolverine into a different part of the Berlin facility. But while doing that, we see that our 2 characters are being watched by somebody else. Now, that character, his name is Maverick, and he is going to be really important. This book is not just about Omega Red, it's also about Maverick as well. But you have Maverick working for somebody else, and they tell them, you have to help Wolverine. And so you have Maverick being able to turn off the lights and get Wolverine out of his restraints. Now, while you have Logan being out of it, his main goal is to get the heck out of there. He knows that he is not ready to deal with Omega Red at the moment. But while trying to get away, he does slip back into a flashback where apparently he did break into a base in Berlin, most likely this one right here, when he was part of X-Team, and their goal was to get a young woman out of there. But as he's trying to get away from Omega Red, he does jump out a window. And at first we're left to believe that maybe Wolverine had officially died after jumping out of that window. But we do learn that Wolverine was actually saved by Maverick. So you have Maverick say, hey, you know what, Logan, I know you from our past. I was also part of X-Team. I was there for a lot of your beatings, but I'm telling you right now, you have one heck of a beating from Omega Red. You need the time to properly heal. So to sit down right there and let your body recover. But then you have Maverick realize that somebody else had just broke into the Berlin facility. And of course, it's the rest of the X-Men looking for Wolverine. And so you have Maverick realize that things are about to get a whole lot more crazy in this actual building. Now, the ending for X-Men number 5 is really more Jim Lee setting up another story coming down the road. You see, we pick up with a character known as Dazzler. Now, Dazzler, she was an X-Men, but by this point, she does not remember anything from her past life. And the reason why, because there was a point in time the X-Men used an item called the Siege Perilous. The Siege Perilous had the ability to give you a new life somewhere around the world. The problem is you may forget everything from your past life. And so for Dazzler, she went through the Siege Perilous. She was granted a new life, but she forgot everything from her past life. And so she has been staying with Lila. Now, Lila is another mutant who has the ability to teleport, but can teleport across the universe or sometimes into other dimensions. Now, while you have the two ladies talking, out of nowhere, Longshot appears. Now, Longshot was an X-Men who also left because he was trying his best to remember everything from his past life. But the problem is he's being chased down by a character known as Spyro from the Mojoverse. Now, we're not going to dive too deep into the Mojoverse right now. Just know it will come again down the road in this video. But as soon as Spyro arrives, you didn't have Lila being able to use her powers to teleport her, Dazzler, and Longshot the heck out of there. But as we get into X-Men issue number 6, we do learn that the blue team has split up into two teams. The first team is Cyclops, Beast, and also Jubilee. Now, we see them being able to take out a few members of the Hand, and so they're doing a good job at first. But then they run into Omega Red. And remember, Omega Red has those death spores, which has the ability to make someone very weak to the point where they pass out, or you might actually die from the death spores. And so you have our heroes at first being able to take down members of the Hand, but once they run into Omega Red, they are all easily taken out. So 3 of the blue team have now been captured by Omega Red. But while you have different members of the X-Men being captured by Omega Red, you have Maverick trying his best to get Wolverine back on his feet again. Now, Wolverine, his healing factor is working overtime, but it does give him the ability to kind of dive back into his past again. Another flashback. Really, it's the same one from earlier, but with more details. You see, we do learn that Wolverine was part of Team X alongside with Sabretooth and also Maverick. And they were assigned to go to Berlin and steal the carbonadium synchronizer from Omega Red and his people. And apparently they had a double agent inside the actual facility. Now, they were able to get to her, and the goal was to get her and the item out of there. The problem was they got cornered by Omega Red, and back then they had no idea how to stop Omega Red. And so you had Sabretooth kill off the young woman so that they can get away without worrying about somebody else. He also broke open a window saying, all right, guys, listen, we got two options here. We can stay here and fight against Omega Red and die, or we can go ahead and just jump out the window and hopefully we can survive. But getting back over to the Lila, Dazzler, and Longshot plotline, we do learn our heroes were teleported over to the Mojoverse. Now, the Mojoverse is a pocket dimension that's being ruled by, well, Mojo. Now, when it comes to Mojo, he's really big on live entertainment. He loves the idea of having people do all these different kind of things in front of people. The problem is, most of the people who work for him are basically slaves. And really, Longshot was a slave who was able to get away and went back to Earth. But apparently, when he got to Earth, he forgot everything about his past life. And so, with him being back here, you would think he would remember everything, but he doesn't. But he does know one thing: him, Dazzler, and also Lila gotta get the heck out of there. And so they tried their best to get away. And luckily, they do run into a creature who tells them, if you follow me, I can most likely get you out of here safely. And they do. Now, we do learn that when it comes to Longshot, he was supposed to lead a rebellion against Mojo. But apparently, he left and the rebellion began to fall apart. But with them being back here, they believe that most likely they should be able to take down Mojo. Now, you have Longshot very confused, but his main focus is right now Dazzler, because in the past, these two characters were dating, but he left to go figure out where he came from. And so with them being back here, he's all like, this is great, I'm back with Dazzler. But let's not forget, she does not remember him because of the Siege Perilous. That was all part of her past life. But she does feel that there is some kind of connection between them, but unfortunately, she has no idea if it's real or not. But getting back over to the main story, we do see the rest of the X-Men team still able to move around. So Rogue, Gambit, and also Psylocke. But while you have those characters walking around the place, they are confronted by more members of the Hand. And you do have our heroes being able to take them down, but then they're confronted by Masuo. Now, remember guys, Masuo is the reason why Psylocke is no longer in her original body. But here's the thing, he also made her join the Hand right after doing the whole process. But he made sure to put a failsafe into her mind to allow him to control her whenever he wants to. And so at first, it does look like Gambit, Psylocke, and also Rogue would be able to take down Masuo. But then he tells her, take your friends down. And just like that, there goes Rogue. There goes Gambit. All because of Psylocke, who's now being controlled by Masuo. Now, even though most of the X-Men have been captured, you still have Wolverine as a free card to play, because when Psylocke's mind is taken over by Masuo, because of her mind connection to Wolverine, he was able to realize there's something wrong with Psylocke, and so he wakes up. When he does though, he sees Maverick. But let's not forget, Logan does not remember anything from his past. So he does not remember Maverick at all. And so right now, is Logan saying, who are you? And you better give me the right answer before I kill you. Now, we do get a small flashback that shows us that yes, Maverick, Sabretooth, and Wolverine were actually a team together, Team X, and they were CIA agents. But Wolverine left the team, it seemed like, when he saw Sabretooth kill off that young lady who was a double agent working for them. Her name was Janice. And so for Logan, he believed that they could have saved her and saved themselves against Omega Red. But unfortunately, Sabretooth said no and had killed her. And so for Logan, he's kind of like, I cannot work with that man right there. And he walked away. And he told the higher ups what went down on that mission. But getting back over to the present day, you have Maverick tell Logan that, hey, listen, my name is Maverick and I work for the German government. And that is really it. That's all you need to know. But after saying that, Logan realized he sees somebody very familiar on Maverick's screen. Somebody else is now getting involved in this mess, and that would be Sabretooth. And we do learn that Sabretooth was brought here by Masuo to help out to find Wolverine. Now, this one page is really important because, yes, it does remind us that there is a connection between Wolverine and also Sabretooth, but we also learn that apparently there is some connection between Sabretooth and also Gambit. Apparently, he knows Gambit very well, and they got a long path with one another. But you didn't have Masuo say your goal is to find Wolverine, so go. But while you have the bad guys getting together, you have Wolverine and Maverick agree to work together. If Maverick is able to help out Logan to save the X-Men, then Logan will help out Maverick to find the Carbonadium Synchronizer. And so with both of them agreeing, you didn't have both characters be confronted by Sabretooth. Now I felt like this battle should have gone to Wolverine and Maverick, but it doesn't. You have Sabretooth being able to win the battle apparently very easily. And so now the entire X-Men team, including Maverick, has now been captured as we enter the last chapter for today's video. Now I kind of want to sit down and talk more about Omega Red for a brief moment. You see, Omega Red is basically a character from Russia. You see, when it came to Russia, they were trying to create their own super soldier, which they were able to do, Omega Red. But they were also creating their own special kind of metal, known as carbonadium. Now, carbonadium is somewhat similar to adamantium. The only difference is carbonadium can be very poisonous to you, and they gave it to Omega Red. Now, Omega Red, he took it and he loved it. The problem was, like I said, it was very poisonous to people, and so it began to slowly kill him. Now, when they gave him carbonadium, they also gave him offensive weapons that was made out of that special kind of metal, these tentacles that he could use on different people. And when he did, he would drain their life energy as a way to stay alive, but to fight back against the poison that was in his body. And the reason why he wants the Carbonadium Synchronizer so bad, because it will help him to fight back against the poison that is always slowly killing him off. And so that is why he had teamed up with everyone else to come after Wolverine, because Logan stole it many years ago. But getting back over to the present day, we do learn that what they are trying to do with Wolverine is now go through his mind to see if he remembers where he had placed the actual Carbonadium Synchronizer. Now, they have the machine also hooked up to Masuo so that he is able to see what Wolverine sees in his past. And when it comes to Masuo, he does learn where Wolverine had actually placed the Carbonadium Synchronizer. But before we are able to learn where, that is when you have Psylocke scream. You see, we kind of find out that Psylocke was pretending this entire time. This entire time, she was not actually under Masuo's control. She was just waiting for the right time to attack. And so, right now for her, this is the most perfect time to attack. Now, to Omega Red, he feels like he should be able to take her down because, again, his death spores. But she said, hey, I made you believe earlier, really, I made you believe that your death spores actually affect me. They don't really affect me that much because of my powers. My psychic powers, they do a great job in protecting me. And so you have her being able to fight back against Omega Red. Now, getting back over to Maverick. Maverick is about to get ready to help out as well too. You see, this is all part of some crazy plan. When Wolverine and also Maverick fought against Sabretooth earlier, Psylocke was there, and they allowed themselves to get captured. But while fighting against Sabretooth, she was able to tag his mind. And so, you have Maverick being able to break free, take down the guards, but Sabretooth is currently under Psylocke's control and has no choice but to help out Maverick to fight back against Omega Red and all the other bad guys. Now, unfortunately, the plan does fall apart a tad bit because you do have Psylocke get taken out very easily by Masuo, and even though she just went one-on-one with, Omega Red, for some reason, she got taken out so easily by Masuo. But with her gone, that means she's no longer controlling the mind of Sabretooth, which means he's now allowed to attack Maverick. And really, him and Maverick were about to free the X-Men. And so at first, it does look like, okay, there goes Maverick. He is about to die. But luckily for Maverick, the X-Men were mostly free. And so they were able to get free to help him out to fight back against Sabretooth. Now, this is where we see the story begin to wrap up very quickly, because you do have Wolverine being able to break out of his restraints and being able to go toe-to-toe with Omega Red. Now, the rest of the bad guys, they still believe that right now they have the upper hand on Wolverine until you have the rest of the X-Men arrive. And so with our heroes working together, they are able to take down all the bad guys very easily. But now they have to leave the place, because right now the place is about to explode. And so you do have our heroes being able to get over to their Blackbird and fly away before the place blows up. And so our heroes were able to get all their teammates back together after a very hard-fought mission. Now, for a brief moment, we do jump back over to the Mojoverse to learn that you had Longshot, Dazzler, and also Lila try their best to lead the rebellion against Mojo, but apparently the entire rebellion was defeated by Mojo and his forces, and Longshot is now a prisoner. Now, Dazzler, she's still free, and her goal right now is to bring some of the X-Men over to the Mojoverse to help out to fight against Mojo. Now, I want to jump back over to Logan, the whole plot line of where is the carbonadium synchronizer? And we do learn that it was actually buried with Janice, the double agent that Logan, Sabretooth, and Maverick were supposed to save in the past, but we saw Sabretooth kill her off so that they have the chance to survive. So after she had died, Logan buried her, but he buried her with the carbonadium synchronizer. Now, Masuo, he was in the mind of Logan, so he knew where he actually hid the carbonadium synchronizer. And so we see Masuo trying to dig up her grave to actually grab it. But you have Logan being able to come up from behind to take down Masuo. Now, it does look like Masuo might get the upper hand, but then Maverick appear. And so once you have Masuo run away, you have Logan being able to hand over the carbonadium synchronizer over to Maverick, who again supposedly works for the Germany government. But either way, the book kind of ends on that note, but also tells us that Logan does not completely remember Maverick just yet. But either way, this is What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. And really, we pick back up with the X-Men. You see, back in 1991, you had X-Men kind of bring together 14 different team members. But Charles Xavier realized that he had enough X-Men to make at least 2 teams, which means we had 2 different X-Men books. Uncanny X-Men and, well, just X-Men. Now, when it comes to just the X-Men book, well, you had Cyclops leading his team, the blue team. You had Wolverine, Jubilee, Gambit, Rogue, Psylocke, Gambit, I think I already said Gambit, and Beast. Either way, he had a pretty solid team. But today's video is all about them. But also, we're going to cover a 4-part story arc. This 4-part story arc is really more of the X-Men teaming up with Ghost Rider. Yes, you heard that right, but it's not Johnny Blaze, because remember, this is the 1990s. We had a different Ghost Rider, but also we are going to begin to learn a tad bit more about the actual origin of Gambit. Now, something we have to mention is that around this time in Marvel Comics, Marvel was actually beginning the process of trying to tell us a tad bit more pieces of the origin of Wolverine. Now, honestly, his origin is not really important for today's video. all you need to know is that you do have Wolverine still trying his best to learn more about his past by using the computer at the school of Charles Xavier, hoping to tap into some random sources out there that could possibly help him know more about his past. Now, something else we have to remember around this time in Marvel Comics is that Bishop had just joined the X-Men. You see, if you saw my other videos I did where we had actually talked about the first appearance of Bishop, you would know that at first he was actually the enemy, and then later on, Charles said, you know what? Go ahead and join the team. Join Storm Team, by the way. And so you have Bishop being introduced to the other team, the blue team that's being led by Cyclops. Now, right off the bat, he tells everyone that in his future, the X-Men are basically dead. The last one alive is Jubilee, but also Gambit. And on top of that, he believes that Gambit is the traitor because he saw a video in his future where Jean Grey said one of their own is killing off the different members of the X-Men. And like I said, there's only two alive, Jubilee and apparently Gambit. And we saw Gambit. And so it's Bishop kind of saying, no, I believe you're the traitor. But you have the rest of the X-Men telling him, like, dude, you gotta relax. Like, first off, you don't actually know he is the traitor. You think that, but you don't have any actual proof. But also, you just got here. So if you want us to like you, you have to work with us. Now, with all that being said, you have Charles say, hey, you know what? It's time for our good old picnic that we had already scheduled. And Bishop's all like, are y'all serious? I just told y'all that somebody on your team might be a traitor and you guys want to have a picnic? Now, something else I do want to mention is the whole idea of the possibility of Cyclops cheating on Jean Grey, but not with Emma Frost, but of course with Psylocke, because you have Psylocke who's currently in the body of an Asian woman walking out of the pool, and she's wearing an outfit that does seem a tad bit, hot for her. And so Cyclops is in a huge trance. Like, he's all like, oh my God, she's beautiful. I want her. I want to be with her. And so while you have Jean Grey trying to talk to him, he's not paying attention. He's looking at Psylocke. And Jean Grey can tell that homeboy is just in love. Not in love, but kind of like, oh, you're over there being googly eyes for her, not me, your girlfriend. Now, you do have Storm try to talk to Bishop once again, because with him coming from a future where, he had to be on guard almost all the time, she's telling him, like, you're not in a world like that. Now, sooner or later, it's going to be a world like that for the X-Men, but at this time, it's not. And it's her saying, you can relax right here, right now. Like, just be here with us as an X-Men and not be on guard all the time. Because with you doing that, you're not going to be really welcomed by the others, but also you're not going to be okay mentally and physically because you're always on guard and not getting that proper rest. And it kind of gets proven here because you have Jean Grey, still mad at Cyclops, so she's using her powers against him. He screams out her name, and Bishop believes that Scott's in danger, but in reality, no, he's not. It's just that Jean Grey is upset with him, and Scott will be okay. And that Storm's saying, just relax, Bishop. Look at you. You went all crazy wanting to help him, not realizing that he does not need any help. Now, for Bishop, he doesn't really, slow down. He does not really try to relax. And the reason why I'm saying that, because you actually have Bishop kind of go after Gambit. Now, around this time, Gambit was trying to be with Rogue, even though he really could not be with Rogue like he wanted to, because he wanted to touch her, kiss her, all of that. But as we all know, if you touch Rogue, her powers are going to activate. But the reason why I'm bringing that up, because you have Rogue and Gambit just having some alone time, and here comes Bishop wanting to attack Gambit because he still believes that Gambit is going to be the traitor. Now, while you have the two guys going back and forth against one another, well, you didn't have Rogue kind of get hit by one of their attacks, and she does get ticked off and she wants to attack Gambit and also Bishop. But before she's able to do anything, you do have Gambit being able to calm her down, but then somebody else blasts all three of them at once. And this begins the adventure of us learning the pieces of the origin of Gambit. This is where we get the introduction of Belladonna, the wife of Gambit. You see, we begin to learn that apparently back in New Orleans, when it comes to Gambit, he was part of the Thieves Guild. And really, there were two different guilds, the Assassins and the Thieves. And apparently, they were kind of like at war against one another. But to kind of work things out, you have both guilds agree to allow Gambit and Belladonna to get married, to kind of build an alliance. But her brother, his brother-in-law, did not like the idea of the two guilds working together. And so he attacked Gambit, and Gambit had no choice but to use self-defense. And unfortunately, it ended up killing off Belladonna's brother. And so with his death, the two guilds were kind of at war against each other once again. But to kind of keep peace, Gambit had no choice but to leave. But apparently, something big is now happening back in New Orleans, where the war has now picked back up again, where you now have the assassins going after the Thieves Guild once again. And so now it's Belladonna saying, Gambit, I need you to come back to New Orleans to kind of help make things better for everybody. And so unfortunately, Gambit has no choice but to go ahead and, well, go back home. But luckily, he now has the X-Men. Now, we also see that back in New Orleans, well, there is another character who's also making their arrival, and that will be Ghost Rider. So this begins the whole Ghost Rider X-Men crossover with this part right here. And so now we have to jump over to Ghost Rider issue number 26. Now, something I do want to say is that this is Danny Ketch. Now, something really important to understand that this Ghost Rider is bonded to a spirit of vengeance. Now, I'm not really going to sit down and dive into which one actually is that is connected to Danny Ketch, because around this time in Marvel Comics, we still had no idea. And I kind of feel like to kind of make the video be a tad bit easier to go through, I'm not going to sit down and give you a whole entire history lesson of Ghost Rider Danny Ketch when technically it's not really important at this moment. Just know that around this time, Danny was attached to a spirit of vengeance. Now, also around this time, Danny was seriously injured in their last battle. And so because of that, you had Ghost Rider come out to keep Danny alive, because there is a huge possibility if Danny comes back out, he's going to die. And so you have the spirit of vengeance just trying to keep Danny alive long enough until they are able to figure out a way to save his life when they turn back into, well, the Danny form. Now, the opening pages for issue number 26 of Ghost Rider, we actually pick up with a member of the Thieves Guild. And we kind of find out that many different members of the guild has been killed off. But the question is right now, is it one of the members of the Assassins? And really, as we dive into the opening pages of this book, we kind of get the idea that yes, one of the members of the Assassin Guild is going around killing off different members of the Thieves Guild. And really, he is able to kill off the one we're seeing right now in the opening pages. And with this one dying, his blood spills on a newspaper that, of course, lands near Ghost Rider. And for Ghost Rider, when he finds out the blood of innocent has been spilled, he's kind of like, the innocent must be revenged. And so now Ghost Rider must find the person who's going around killing off different members of the Thieves Guild who are technically innocent people. Now, we also see that the X-Men had arrived into New Orleans. Now, we also kind of find out that Rogue and Belladonna have technically flew ahead by themselves. And for Gambit, He's kind of freaking out because, well, his wife and his new lady friend are now having all those private conversations about him. Now, you do have an officer try to pull over our heroes, and, well, unfortunately, you have our heroes use all their combination of their powers to destroy his car, but to also make sure that he does not want to no longer follow them and try to arrest them. Now, getting back over to Ghost Rider, we see him arriving in the French quarters of New Orleans. And really, we see him arrive at this church. Now, by the time he gets over there, we actually pick back up once again with our mysterious member of the Assassin Guild killing off two more members of the Thieves Guild. Now, for Ghost Rider, he does not really know what's going on when it comes to the assassin and thieves. All he knows is that innocent people are being killed off. And when innocent blood is spilled, he has to get revenge for them. And so we see him trying his best to fight against our mysterious member of the Assassin Guild. Now, the way this story is going, you can kind of tell that there's really more to this character, and we're kind of left to wonder what or who could this actual character be. But the problem is for Ghost Rider, when he does follow the mysterious character inside a church, well, he's then surrounded by more members of the Assassin Guilds. But this gets even crazier because we kind of find out the different members of the Assassin Guild is actually, well, the Brood. Now, we have talked about the Brood before. They are an alien race that love the idea of just taking over different planets across the universe. But how they do it is very unique. You see, you basically have them plant an egg in someone's body. That egg can then hatch. When that egg hatches, the new brood inside that person will begin to take over that person's body, beginning to get rid of the original owner of the body and replacing owner with the brood. And so usually if you're somebody who has an egg inside of you, once that egg hatches, you're dead. Your body and mind are completely gone, taken over by the brood that had hatched inside of you, which means all these different members of the assassins, well, they return to broods. Now they're part of the brood army. But apparently the queen of the brood is here. And she's kind of like, hey guys, you know what? Get Ghost Rider, because if we are able to add him to our ranks, we'll be really powerful, because once the brood does take over your body, they still have access to your powers. And hey, Ghost Rider will be a great person to add to their army. And really, you have the X-Men arrive at that same location that Ghost Rider is at. At first, they're outside, and they find the two dead bodies of the Thieves Guild we saw earlier when you had Ghost Rider arrive at this location. Now, our heroes realize that they should go deeper into the church. And really, for Wolverine, he does pick up the scent of some things he kind of knows a lot about. For example, Ghost Rider, because by this point, Ghost Rider, Punisher, and Wolverine had a crossover called Heart of Darkness. And really, we had covered that crossover, but also he smells the scent of the brood. And so when they get inside the church, they realize that they are now surrounded by the brood, but also Ghost Rider has been officially brought into their army. And so as we dive into X-Men issue number 9, the third chapter of this crossover, we pick up with the X-Men fighting against the Brood, but also fighting against Ghost Rider. Now, this battle does go on for a few pages, where you do have our heroes just trying their best to survive here. Now, as the battle goes on, the floor underneath them collapses. And of course, you have our heroes begin to fall deeper into the underground tunnels of the base of the Brood. Now, while they're falling, they're also getting separated from one another, kind of making new groups for our heroes to kind of go on their own adventures in the actual tunnels of the Brood. And it kind of gives us the opportunity to see some couples trying to reestablish their feelings for one another, like Gambit and Belladonna, because they fell away from the rest of the heroes. And with that happening, we kind of see her explaining why she's so mad with Gambit. Now, the reason why is really more because she's saying, listen, I know you left because you were exiled as a way to keep peace between the two guilds, but she felt like she should have left with him. They both should have been exiled so that they could have stayed together to keep their marriage strong. And so with him leaving, it really did hurt her because he did not even offer the chance for her to come with him. But it also shows that he does kind of regret not bringing her along. So you're kind of like, oh, wait, are these two characters going to possibly get back together? Now, I want to jump back over to Beast and also Wolverine, who were separated from the rest of the group. Now, those two characters, they are actually confronted by Ghost Rider. And you have Wolverine, going to battle against Ghost Rider. And you have Beast kind of like, hey, maybe we should slow down. And the only reason why he is saying that because you have both of our characters realize that maybe, well, Ghost Rider is not completely taken over because the Brood only took over Ghost Rider, but not taking over Danny's mind, which means there's a chance the body of Ghost Rider can actually fight the Brood out of it and then be able to turn back to normal. But you didn't have the Brood being able to get somewhat control of the body of Ghost Rider to make him run away. But you have Wolverine say, hey, I'm going to follow him, but Beast, you're the brains of this operation. Try to find a way to save Ghost Rider. And there is this weird, small, awkward moment where you actually have Cyclops pulling up Psylocke from a cliff, and she's kind of flirting with him, and he's trying to not flirt back, but you can tell Homeboy wants to, but also Homeboy wants to get with her as well. But you did have the two characters go find the other members, which leads us over to Rogue and Jubilee, where you have Jubilee and also Rogue being able to find all these cocoons. Now, inside of them are different people who are actual members of the Thieves and also the Assassin Guilds. And so it does seem like the Brood were keeping them for a special reason. But the question is right now, why? Now, as soon as you have Rogue and Jubilee being able to regroup with Cyclops and Psylocke, you then have more of the Brood being led by Ghost Rider trying to attack our heroes. And so you do have our heroes begin to work together. And you didn't have other parts of the team begin to rejoin the main group. So Gambit appears, Belladonna, Wolverine, Beast, but with the combination of all our heroes working together, they were able to bring down all the Broods in this room, but to also bring down the Ghost Rider Brood as well. Now, with that happening, you didn't have Psylocke use her psychic knife to connect her mind to Ghost Rider mind, to hopefully help Ghost Rider fight against the control of the Brood. And so we do see Psylocke she does. She enters the astral plane. Now, with her doing that, she does begin to kind of cut the connection between Danny and also the Brood inside the body of Ghost Rider. Now, unfortunately, at first, she's not really able to cut that bond, but luckily for her, Belladonna is able to enter the astral plane with her. And so we begin to kind of learn a tad bit more about the powers of Belladonna, but unfortunately, it's not really going to be important for the story for us to learn more about her powers. And here is the reason why. Because right after you do have Psylocke and Belladonna being able to cut that connection between Ghost Rider, Danny, and also the Brood, you didn't have Ghost Rider and Danny being able to turn back to normal, but you didn't have Psylocke and Belladonna being able to go back into, well, the main reality. And when they do, well, Belladonna, she took some injuries on the astral plane that carried over to her actual body. And so when she came back to her actual body, those injuries led to her death. And that's why I say, unfortunately, it does not matter for us to learn her powers because she dies right here in the arms of Gambit. But with the connection now being broken between Ghost Rider and also the brood that was inside of him, well, now Ghost Rider is able to rejoin the side of good, to help out the X-Men to go after, well, the last few survivors of the brood, but most especially the queen of the brood, who's currently here in New Orleans. And so now you have our heroes beginning to leave this area to go find her. And this leads into the final chapter of this crossover. And so, as we dive into the final chapter, Ghost Rider issue number 27, you have our heroes go deep into the actual tunnels of the broods to hopefully find the queen, but they also have to find the children. You see, we had learned that basically the children of the Assassin Guild and the Thieves Guild have also been kidnapped as well by the brood. And the reason why, because they're special in their own kind of way, thanks to the Assassin Guild and the Thieves Guild. Now, we're not technically told what made the children so special, but again, it's just building up on the actual origin of Gambit here. But either way, you do have Gambit, Ghost Rider, and also Wolverine go after the Queen, while you have the rest of the crew being able to find the children and begin to free them. Now, for a brief moment, we have to jump over to Johnny Blaze, and here's the reason why. Because around his time in Ghost Rider, like I said earlier, Danny got seriously injured. And so, to save his life, you have the Spirit of Vengeance just staying active while you kind of have Danny locked away to keep him alive. And so, for the Spirit of Vengeance, his main goal is to find Johnny Blaze, to hopefully find a way to save the life of Danny. And so Johnny gives word that Danny, Ghost Rider, is technically in New Orleans as well. And so you have Johnny head over there to see why in the world is the Spirit of Vengeance is in New Orleans for. And really, the ending of this book does get wrapped up very quickly here because you do have Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Gambit being able to find the Queen. And while they're being able to find the Queen, the rest of the team was also nearby. And so you have our heroes work together to fight against the Queen. Now, really, when I say fight together, I really mean more that at first they do work together, but then you have Ghost Rider say, no, this time is up to me to take down the Queen, because in reality, this chapter is his book, Ghost Rider issue number 27. We have to make sure that Homeboy gets the light here. And so he is able to, grab the Queen, take her outside, and begin to beat down on her. Now, the rest of the X-Men are nearby, and you also have Johnny Blaze appear as well. Now, we do get this weird thing where the Queen does get back up like 2 more times after you have our heroes believe that the Queen of the Brood is officially dead, but every single time they kill her off, or they believe they kill her off, she gets right back up. And so you have Ghost Rider and Johnny being able to work together using Hellfire to kind of put her down permanently. And you then have the rest of the X-Men use their powers to make sure that she stays down this time. But the book really ends on the X-Men kind of going back home to the X Mansion. Gambit is sad about the idea that his wife, Belladonna, is officially dead. And you have Ghost Rider and Johnny begin to work together to hopefully save the life of Danny. Now, let's not forget that there was a mysterious assassin earlier. And this assassin, we have no idea who he is. But apparently, he could be a very important character for both the X-Men and also Ghost Rider. But this is where Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the X-Men, we now jump into X-Men issues number 10 and issue number 11. We're now going to cover a 2-part story arc that actually takes place back on Mojo World. And of course, it's bringing back another character that has been gone for a short period of time, and that'll be the character known as Longshot. Now, before we are able to dive into today's video, we have to recover some things that are going to be somewhat important for today's video. Like, for example, the actual origin of Longshot. Now, we don't know much about the character just yet. As a matter of fact, we are going to learn more about the character down the road when it comes to Shatterstar as well. But for Longshot, we do know that he comes from Mojo World. Now, Mojo World is a pocket dimension in the main Marvel universe. And really, in that dimension, it is completely ruled by a character known as Mojo. Now, for Mojo, when he actually took over this dimension, he wanted slaves to actually control. And so he called a guy named Arise. And he asked Arise to create a bunch of slaves, a bunch of human slaves. And one of those slaves was Longshot. Now, when it came to Arise, he also wanted to make sure the slaves had the ability to fight back against Mojo and possibly free the world from his control. And that is where Longshot comes in, because Longshot was technically created to kind of lead an army against Mojo to hopefully free the world. Now, a couple of videos ago, we had actually talked about the idea of Longshot trying to free the world that's currently being controlled by Mojo. He actually led a resistance against the army of Mojo. The problem is, well, he lost. Now, he did had a tad bit of help from two people, Lila and also Dazzler. Now, Lila is not really important, but Dazzler is. And here's the reason why. Because Dazzler was the woman he loved around his time in Marvel Comics. Now, at this point in time, Dazzler does not technically remember everything from her past life. And let me explain. You see, there was a moment in time where you had the X-Men actually go through an item called the Siege Perilous. Now, the Siege Perilous had the ability to give you a new life, but there was a catch. You see, you might remember everything from your previous life, or you may forget everything from your previous life. So for Dazzler, when she had walked through the Siege Perilous, she had forgotten everything from her past life. Now, over time, she had begun to remember different things, like, for example, the idea of being in love with Longshot. But she was there with him where they had tried to lead an army against Mojo's army, and they had officially failed. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about is actually Mojo himself. Now, Mojo is the actual ruler of Mojo World. But here's the catch. Mojo is really big on entertainment. And so every single time we see this character, he's always trying something new, something big as a way to turn it into a TV show to entertain his people, to get the good ratings for all his different shows. And that is going to be very important as we dive into X-Men issue number 10. And so getting into X-Men issue number 10, we actually pick up with Longshot first. Now, you have Longshot walking around the area of where the X-Mansion used to be at. And the reason why I say used to be, because it had just crashed on top of somebody. It's kind of walking around wondering, where in the world is he? Because Longshot does not completely remember everything about his past. Now, for Longshot, he's kind of wondering what in the world is going on, but he's then confronted by four members of the X-Men: Cyclops, Rogue, Wolverine, and Beast. Now, these four characters are technically not themselves. In reality, they have been changed into different versions of themselves that kind of works for Mojo and one of his new TV shows they are currently in. For example, Wolverine is a coward right now. Cyclops, he continues to doubt himself every single time. Now, for our heroes, they do tell, Longshot, their master Mojo put them there. And so it kind of helps Longshot remember a tad bit of what's happening at the moment. That he was an X-Men. That these guys are the X-Men. That, matter of fact, he's on Mojo World, and now he knows he has to save them and also save himself as well. And now we jump over to, well, Mojo. And like I said earlier, when it comes to Mojo, he's really big on entertainment in his world, in his dimension. And so we learn our heroes are currently in a new kind of TV show. Now, it's called Wizard of X, but the original version is called Wizard of Oz. And so it's just Mojo taking that movie and turning it into some kind of X-Men movie for entertainment for the entire world. Now, we also learn that he also has Charles Xavier by his side as well. So the entire X-Men have been captured except the other team. Because remember, around this time, Marvel Comics, you had two different X-Men teams. You had Gold Team and you had Blue Team. Now, Blue Team is Cyclops' team, but Gold Team was Storm Team, and their adventures took place over in Uncanny X-Men. And so currently, they're not here at the moment. Just the Blue Team is, and also Charles Xavier. Now, we also do learn that for Mojo, he's going to use the other part of the blue team, so like Gambit, Jubilee, and also Psylocke, to fight against the rest of the blue team of Cyclops, Wolverine, Beast, and also Rogue in this new movie that he is putting together. But first, we now have to figure out how in the world did the X-Men get captured and brought over to Mojo's world. And so we jump back in time to kind of get the full details of how the X-Men were brought over to Mojo's world. So here's the thing. You see, you had Dazzler, after she lost the last battle against Mojo, she used a teleporter known as Meek to teleport back over to the main Marvel universe to find the X-Men, which she was able to do. And she informed the X-Men what happened to Longshot and Lila, who was also there with them. Now, for Dazzler, while she's telling everything to the X-Men, the teleporter she used, Meek, is actually a traitor. He's not on her side at all. Matter of fact, he works for Mojo. And so you have Meek begin to teleport the entire X-Men back over to Mojo's world. Now, as soon as they arrive there, you then have our heroes trying their best to fight against Mojo and his army. Now, this battle does go on for a good amount of pages, but really it only ends with the X-Men actually losing the battle, but also you have Dazzler kind of being stopped by Longshot, because at this point Longshot was under Mojo's control. And so when she saw Longshot, she stopped fighting and tried to break him out of Mojo's control. But the problem is Mojo's army caught up to her and began to blast her, and unfortunately she was shot out the window, falling to what seems to be her death. And so while she's gone, the rest of the X-Men have been captured, and then they were brought over to the Wizard of X show that Mojo is currently putting on. But getting back over to the present day, we see Mojo being able to use the blue team to fight against each other. So you do have like Gambit, Psylocke, and also Jubilee fighting against the rest of their team for this new TV show of Mojo's. And you have Longshot kind of wondering what in the world can he do to break everyone free from the control of Mojo. But then we jump over to another character, and that would be Dazzler. And remember, when it came to that flashback, we saw her get blasted out a window, and it did seem like she was falling to her death. But apparently she has survived, and now she's being found by somebody else. And this is the clone of Mojo. And so now we dive into X-Men issue number 11. Now, with this issue, we actually pick up with Dazzler, and we had just learned that she has survived the actual fall we saw in the last chapter. But we also see her with Mojo 2. Now, Mojo 2 is actually a clone of Mojo. But here's the catch. He wants to be the ruler of the Mojoverse, the Mojo world. But the problem is the only way to take over the entire world is that if your TV show has the highest ratings, which means that right now for Mojo 2, he's kind of hoping that Dazzler can kind of help him do a new show that will have higher ratings than the current Mojo show is currently doing. Now, for X-Men issue number 11, there are a lot of things happening in this book, but really, it can all be summed up in one quick moment. Let me explain. So, while you still have the X-Men Blue Team fighting against one another, you have Charles Xavier begin the process of trying to save each member of the X-Men. So, for example, you have Charles being able to connect his mind to Psylocke's mind, who's then able to connect her mind to Cyclops' mind. And then you have those three characters kind of go through a big major plan to help free the other members of the X-Men from Mojo's control. And when they do that, they are then able to actually break into the broadcast room. I kind of forgot the actual name of the room, but either way, you have our heroes being able to break into that room. Except when they do, at the exact time, you also have Dazzler and Mojo 2 appear as well. Now, let me tell you how fast the story does actually wrap up, because you do have Longshot being the one to actually attack Mojo. And this battle is very short-lived, because once you actually have Longshot being able to strike Mojo right in the chest, it seems like there's a huge flash, and then out of nowhere, Mojo is gone. And so we're kind of left to believe in the possibility that Mojo is dead. And with him now being gone, it makes room for somebody else to take his place. And of course, it will be Mojo 2, his clone. And you have everyone wondering if Mojo 2 is actually going to do a better job than Mojo did. Now, here's the big thing though. You see, for Longshot, we do learn that he is going to be a father, because Dazzler is pregnant. Now, this is going to lead into a very interesting storyline down the road that involves Longshot, Dazzler, and also Shatterstar as well. It gets a tad bit crazy. Now, there was a backup story in actually both issues focusing on Maverick and really talking more about the Xavier file. Now, the Xavier file is going to be really important in later books down the road, but for right now, we can just focus on good old Maverick. Now remember, we're still learning more about the character of Maverick. All we know is that in the past, him and Wolverine and Sabretooth and a few other characters were part of a team called Team X. And that's really it. Now, for Maverick, we do know that he's currently working for somebody known as Arthur Barrington. And that's going to be very important in later books down the road for the character Maverick. Now, for Maverick, he was assigned to go on a special mission. And that special mission was to go after a character known as Alexander Reiking. Now, Alexander Reiking is going to be one of those characters we're going to see down the road in later books as well for a bigger story arc. But apparently, Arthur Barrington, the guy that Maverick is working for, wants Maverick to kill off this guy, but to also talk to him about how in the world did Charles Xavier was able to get his hands on the Xavier file. Now, while you have Maverick about to kill off Alexander Reiking, that is when he is saved at the last minute by a character known as Warhawk. Now, Warhawk is a character we had actually talked about in the past, but only for a very short story arc in our earlier coverage over the X-Men. He's not really a big-time character, but he's been around for a very long time. You see, for Warhawk, he actually first appeared back in Marvel Premiere issue number 23 in 1975. Now, for Mitchell Turner, he was actually given a variation of the super soldier serum to save his life. It was given to him by Dr. Burstein. Now, I don't really want to talk about Dr. Burstein. I kind of want to talk more about Mitchell Turner here. Now, with the super soldier serum, it did save his life, but he was able to gain steel like skin and super strength. And honestly, he's very close to Luke Cage in many different ways. But again, I just want to focus on Mitchell here. Now, for Mitchell, over time, he became mentally unstable, and so he became an assassin used by the CIA in Vietnam. Now, over the years, other people had actually hired him for different reasons. So, for example, there was a point in our coverage over the X-Men where you had the Hellfire Club actually hire Warhawk to go after the X-Men. And that was a very good, interesting story arc there too. Now, we do learn that Alexander was actually brought here to this lab to save the life of Mitchell. And so when you have Maverick bust into the facility, well, Warhawk has no choice but to go ahead and protect Alexander from Maverick. And so the next part of the story is really more of Maverick fighting against Warhawk. Now, we do learn that Warhawk was here with Alexander to actually gain stronger metal skin. But either way, the battle does continue on where it does lead up to the moment you have Maverick being able to actually take down Warhawk. And really, he does it by causing a small explosion in the actual facility by using Warhawk. And so we're kind of left to believe that Warhawk is dead, and so is Alexander. I'm going to tell you right now, neither characters are actually dead, but we kind of do learn that Alexander has no idea how Charles Xavier was able to get his hands on the Xavier file. And really, we have no idea what the Xavier file is, but sooner or later, we are going to learn about it. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please, leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but now we have reached a point where we are going to sit down and actually cover Shattershot. Now, Shattershot is actually a small X-Men crossover that came out in the early 1990s. Let me explain. So in the early 1990s, Marvel would do all these different kind of annual crossovers. They'll use their annuals to tell some kind of crossover story. And so when it came to year 1992, they had 4 different annuals that they could use to actually do a small X-Men crossover between X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, X-Factor, and X-Force called Shattershot. Now, Shattershot is really used as a way to kind of give us more detail about the actual origin of Longshot, but also Shatterstar as well, but also giving us more information about the actual creator of Longshot, a character known as Arise. Now, to kind of understand the actual origin of Arise, we kind of have to talk about another character, and that would be Mojo. Now, Mojo is one of those classic X-Men characters. You see, he's from a different dimension known as the Mojoverse, and he rules over Mojo World. Now, for Mojo, he belongs to a race called the Spineless Ones, and here's the reason why. Because his race, they did not evolve properly. So unfortunately, they're not really able to kind of stand up straight. Now, they did have Arise being able to create different kind of exoskeletons to kind of help them stand up straight. But most of the spineless ones did not want to use those at all. And so they have platforms to kind of help them move around, kind of like Mojo does. Now, for Mojo, he also wanted slaves to kind of complete all the different tasks they needed done for themselves. Like, for example, having slaves feed them, having slaves cook for them, having slaves move different items around. And so that is where Arise came in. Arise was a cyborg who was able to create humans in this other dimension. Now, when he was creating these humans, they were based off, well, the main Marvel Universe humans, us. And so for Arise, when he was trying to create these beings, he was able to create humans in this other dimension. But unfortunately, they became slaves. Now, something else I do want to talk about is the actual Shatterstar placement. What I mean is that some of the pages or some of the chapters of Shattershot does take place before some other videos that we have already done on the channel. And some of it takes place after those videos as well. And you see what I mean as we go through today's video. So for example, the first chapter we're going to talk about is X-Men Annual #1 from the 1992 series. And really, this annual kind of takes place before X-Men issue #10, where you have Longshot being able to get rid of Mojo. Now, we can kind of talk a tad bit about Longshot. You see, for Longshot, he was actually created by Arise to be the messiah for the human race in the Mojoverse, to lead the humans against Mojo and to hopefully take him down. Now, if you saw my video over X-Men issue number 10 and 11, you would know that when it came to Longshot, he had taken down Mojo, and it made space for Mojo 2, the clone of Mojo, to be the new ruler of the Mojo world. Now, like I said earlier, some parts of Shattershot takes place before certain events. And so for X-Men Annual number 1, it takes place before that moment right there. And so as we dive into this chapter, we kind of see Mojo still being the ruler of this world. Now, like I said, Longshot is the messiah for the human race in the Mojo world, but also Longshot was given abilities by Arise to kind of make sure for him to be that messiah, but to also be able to take down Mojo. Now, as we go through Shattershot, we're going to learn that there's some huge lovely time traveling that's really involved for Longshot and other characters around him. And so with all that information now out there, we can now properly dive into X-Men Annual number 1. And really, we pick up with Mojo himself trying to hunt down Arise with a small army that he had brought with him. Really, it's not even a small army, it's a huge army. But either way, it's Mojo trying his best to find Arise. And that's why I say that X-Men Annual number 1 takes place before X-Men issue number 10, because as you see, Mojo is still alive and well, and he's trying his best to hunt down Arise. Now for Arise, he knows that Mojo is coming for him. Like, it's a well-known fact. But for Arise, he does have an escape plan. That escape plan is to actually go over to Earth. Now, we don't really know the actual plan for Arise here, like why he's trying to go back over to Earth for, but we do know that he wants to make sure that he will not be involved or be forced to be involved in some kind of plans for Mojo. Like, for example, for Mojo, he wants Arise to create more humans to be slaves in this reality. He wants Arise to create cyborgs or weapons for the Spotless Ones to use. And so for Arise, he's not down to be used by Mojo at all. And so we see him being able to actually open up a portal and travel over to the Earth dimension. Now for Mojo and his forces, they're kind of wondering, where did Arise go to? But then they kind of realize that he just traveled through dimensions and most likely over to Earth. Now we are told by Mojo that when people try to travel between dimensions, if their mind is not strong enough or their mind is not properly prepared to travel through dimensions, they might not remember anything from their previous life. Meaning that for Arise, when he arrives on Earth, he might not remember anything at all from the previous years. But now we can jump over to Earth and we actually pick up with the X-Men. Now, if you know your X-Men, you know around this time in Marvel Comics, we had two different X-Men teams. Let me explain. So we had the Uncanny X-Men book for a while, but then by 1992, Marvel realized the X-Men were really popular. And so you had the original X-Factor team rejoin the X-Men, which made 14 different members on the team. But for Charles Xavier, he had too many X-Men for just one team. And so he said, hey, you know what? I'll have two teams, which then led to Marvel saying, fine, that's cool. We'll have two different X-Men books. We'll have the Uncanny X-Men, which is the gold team, Storm's team, and you didn't have just X-Men, which is the blue team, being led by Cyclops, his team. And so the first chapter is X-Men Annual number 1, where we actually focus only on the blue team, Cyclops team. So you have Wolverine, Beast, Psylocke, Rogue, Gambit, and also Cyclops. Now, here's the thing. You also have Cyclops kind of, for me personally, thinking about cheating on Jean Grey with Psylocke, because the man is truly in love with her. Either way, oh, we also have Jubilee as well, forgot about her. But yes, this is your X-Men gold team, blue team for this chapter. And we currently see them in the Danger Room just trying to work out and be prepared for future problems down the road they could possibly face. Now, once they do finish their Danger Room session, you didn't have Forge and Charles Xavier call the blue team over to inform the blue team that, hey, listen, Cerebro had just detected a mutant, but not like a mutant from Earth, but an alien mutant. Something different had arrived. And so it's the X-Men now being informed of the possibility of the arrival of Arise. Kind of a way to bring in the X-Men, but to also kind of get them ready for trouble coming very soon they're gonna have to face. Now, I kind of want to jump back over to Mojo and Mojo World. Here's the reason why. So for Mojo World, it's really big on entertainment, right? So if your show or movie has the highest ratings, the best, TV show, whatever, you can become the actual ruler of that world. Now, that is only one of the many ways that you are able to become the actual ruler of that world. Like, for example, in our video over X-Men issue number 10 and 11, when it came to Mojo 2, the clone of Mojo 1, that was his goal, to have a show that had higher ratings, to outbeat Mojo 1, and then become the actual ruler of Mojo World. Now, the plans changed when you had Longshot get rid of Mojo, which then made space for Mojo 2 to become the actual ruler of that world. Now, with that being said, for Mojo, he kind of wants to go live as they try to bring Arise back over to their dimension. And so he wants to team over to Earth to find Arise, capture Arise, and bring him back over to the dimension, but do everything on live television. Now, at first, he wants to use the character known as Spiral. Now, Spiral is also a complicated character that does have a lot of connections to Longshot, Shatterstar, Mojo, and also Arise. But I kind of want to save her for the third chapter. But you do have Mojo assistant tell him like, hey, you can't use her right now because you got plans for her down the road that she kind of has to go through before we are able to properly use her again. And so for Mojo, he has to use a different plan or a different team to go after Arise to bring him back over to this reality. But now getting back over to the X-Men, we actually see them currently heading over to Afghanistan. And the reason why, because, well, Arise had apparently arrived in that location. Now, for our heroes, when they do arrive there, their main goal is to make sure that they don't cause a international incident. And so they're trying to best to avoid any kind of problems with the actual government of Afghanistan. But when they do arrive there, they do get targeted by some missiles, and you have our heroes use their abilities to kind of fight against those missiles and also some soldiers in Afghanistan. But once they do land, they do explain why they are there for. They're there for the mysterious character who had appeared out of nowhere. And you have the people tell our heroes, okay, if you're looking for the stranger, he's in there. And so you have the X-Men being able to grab Arise and take him back over to the X-Mansion. But right after you had our heroes find Arise, well, Mojo had also sent over his team of people to hopefully find Arise and bring him back over to the Mojo verse. But also, they're currently live. And so this whole situation or this whole mission is currently being played right now back in the Mojo verse for all the viewers to actually watch. Now, for our heroes, they're using Psylocke to kind of dive into the mind of Arise, because like I said earlier, when it comes to Mojo, he knew that Arise would not be able to remember anything from his entire life, because the whole idea of traveling between dimensions can take a toll on someone's mind, like Arise. And so you have Psylocke trying her best to dive deep into his mind, and really she does get to the point of finding out that this man is the creator of Longshot, but then she knows that some people, of course Mojo's team, had arrived to retrieve Arise and bring him back to, well, the Mojo verse. And this leads into a battle between the X-Men and the team of characters that Mojo has sent over to this reality. Now, the battle does go on for a few pages, and really, you do have our heroes being able to easily defeat these characters, but what I want to focus on more is what takes place at the end of the battle, because you do have one of the members of Mojo's team actually mention Longshot. Now, Longshot was an X-Men. He was on their team for a good while, but let's not forget that Longshot had disappeared a while back and no one truly knew where he went to. All they knew was that he left the team to go figure out his past, and that was a while back. And so for our heroes, they have been wondering, where in the world is Longshot? And so when you have these guys kind of talk about Longshot, our heroes want answers, especially for Wolverine and Rogue, because they were actually on the team with Longshot, unlike Cyclops, and by that point, he was on X Factor. But you have Cyclops say, no, we are not going to follow them into that dimension portal. We have no idea where it goes. Now, we know it goes over to the Mojoverse, but they don't know that. Now, the last chapter of this book is really more of Mojo being very upset that his team was not able to grab a rise. And so for Mojo, it's now time to move on to a new idea, to move on from a rise. He says, you know what? I'm going to try my best to create life without him, to create my own slaves, my own kind of sport. Now, while you have Mojo saying that, he has no idea that he is currently being watched by somebody else. Somebody who's going to be the main bad guy for the next chapter, which is Uncanny X-Men Annual number 16. Now we have to jump into Uncanny X-Men Annual number 16. Now, for this chapter, we jump over to the other X-Men team. Like I said earlier, in the early 1990s, there were two X-Men teams, Blue and Gold team. Now, we just covered the first chapter that had the Blue team. Now it's time for the Gold team that's being led by Storm. Now, the opening pages of this book, it's not the X-Men. It's a group called the Death Sponsors. Now, they do work for a mysterious character who, unfortunately, we're not technically told who that character is. Now, for this mysterious character, he brings in the idea of pirating transmissions, being a bootleg kind of person. Let me explain. So, like I said earlier, when it comes to Mojoverse, they're really big on entertainment. If you have the highest ratings, then hey, guess what? You can be a leader of the world, the leader of the world. Now, like I said earlier, it's only one of the many ways that you are actually able to be the leader of the world. But here's the catch. You see, there are other people who are taking your transmission and trying to show their own show so that they are able to get those high ratings and then possibly take over the world. Now, for our mysterious character, he kind of want to do a show on Mojo's network to continue to show the embarrassments of Mojo, to kind of show that he's not really good at entertainment, but also not a good leader. And so that is where the Death Sponsors come in. They work for our mysterious character. Now, our mysterious character, he realized that there are 3 different things he could do on Earth right now that could continue to embarrass Mojo on live television. That would be Spiral, which I said again, should be very important in the 3rd chapter, Longshot, the Messiah, and also Arise. If his team is able to go after one of those 3 characters and actually be able to capture one of those characters, then most likely he'll have high ratings, but on Mojo's network. But again, if he does get those high ratings, then most likely he can become the actual ruler of this reality. And so he tells Death Sponsors, go into the Earth reality and find one of those 3 characters. But now we have to jump over to the X-Men. Now, like I said earlier, the X-Men is the Gold team, led by Storm. Now, around this point in time in Marvel Comics, the X-Men had just gained Bishop to their team. Now, Bishop is a tad bit rough around the edges and also not really a team player, and at the same time he's also somebody who's not afraid to take some big risks when it comes to completing a mission. And really, that last one right there is going to be very important for this chapter alone. Now, for Bishop and the rest of the X-Men team, they're currently going through a danger room session, but in the middle of the session, well, you do have Apocalypse appear. Now, this is not the real Apocalypse. It's part of the whole danger room training session, but it gets to the point where you have Apocalypse but to kill off Bishop. And the question is right now, will Bishop go ahead and let himself be killed off as a way to save children that Apocalypse is actually after, or will one of the X-Men step in to actually help out? Now, the training session does end with Bishop kind of being okay with, giving up his life to just stop Apocalypse, to kind of show that he's not a weakling, that he's not somebody who easily backs down. And really, it does get brought up by Charles Xavier at the end of the training session, because for Charles, he wants to understand why Bishop would be okay with taking that kind of risk, because honestly, it was a big one. You're talking about the idea of giving up your life to protect somebody you don't even know. For Charles, he really wanted Bishop to kind of find a way around that situation, but to also allow other members of the X-Men to actually help out. But for Bishop, he truly believes that he knows what is best at that exact moment. And so for Bishop, he just leaves. And it kind of shows that he's not really adapting to the idea of being an X-Men, of being on a team with the rest of the X-Men. Now, we also learned that Arise is currently staying at the X-Mansion with the X-Men. Now, apparently after the blue team had saved him from the earlier team that was sent by Mojo, they brought him back over to the X-Mansion, and the blue team went on a different mission. So now it's the gold team's problem. Now, you really have the book say that actually you had Charles bring in Jean Grey, because Jean Grey is more skilled psychic than Psylocke. It's also kind of establishing the whole idea of who's the best psychic on the team. You got Charles, you got Jean Grey, and then there's Psylocke. And Psylocke, unfortunately, kind of gets put on this back burner for a lot of different things. But either way, you have Jean Grey trying her best to dive deep into the mind of Arise. But the problem is, every single time she gets deeper and deeper, or like when she's able to access a certain point that could possibly help him, but also our heroes figure out more about him, he somehow just locks up. Like, he's afraid to allow her in, but it's not really him trying to lock her out. It's just that his mind is blocking her out for unknown reasons. Now, for Charles, he knows that the other X-Men team have protected him from an unknown force. And so for Charles, he's kind of wondering, will they have to continue to actually protect him? We actually jump back over to the dev sponsors, only really for a brief moment, because we do get confirmation that they have arrived onto Earth. And with them being on Earth, their main goal currently is to find Arise. If they're able to get him and bring him back over to the Mojoverse, but also do it on live television, that'll be some good ratings and allow the mysterious character kind of step in the role as the actual leader of the Mojo world. For our heroes back at the X-Mansion, they're kind of just waiting for, anything to actually happen. And honestly, it comes to them automatically, because while you have our heroes waiting, you do have some of the members of the dev sponsors actually arrive. Now, they're outside the X-Mansion, so you have Charles sent out Bishop, Archangel, and also Iceman to actually deal with those people. Now, here's the thing. You see, while you have those three heroes trying to fight against some members of the dev sponsors, the rest of the members of the dev sponsors are trying to sneak their way into the actual X-Mansion. And at this point, all they have left now to protect Arise is Colossus, Storm, and Jean Grey. Now, technically, that is a pretty strong team, but the dev sponsors will give our heroes an actual challenge. Unlike the other X-Men team where we see them being able to win their battle against the forces of Mojo, we're going to see our heroes actually struggle fighting against this team called the Death Sponsors. Now, I kind of want to skip over a few pages and get to the main point for this chapter, where you do have the Death Sponsors being able to get their hands on Arise. And with them being able to get their hands on Arise, their main goal now is to go ahead and head back over to, well, their reality, the Mojoverse. Now, here's the thing. They're also able to help Arise remember everything from his past life. And so with him now being able to remember everything, he kind of knows what he's trying to do here, why he came to Earth. Now, like I said, they're trying to take him back over to the Mojoverse. And so with them trying to actually achieve that goal, you have Bishop learn that their teleporter has to connect his mind to the rest of his team mind, including Arise mind, just to be able to bring them all back over to the Mojoverse. But Bishop realized if he's able to take out the teleporter, then that means the Arise will most likely stay here. He has to do it at the right exact time before the teleporter is actually able to connect his mind to Arise mind. And so when you have Bishop being able to take out the teleporter, the other members of the Death Sponsors, only their minds were actually connected to the teleporter. Now, we're kind of left to believe that they are actually killed off at that exact moment. They're not. They come back way later down the road in a short miniseries for Shatterstar, sorry. But you do have Bishop being able to save the life of Arise. Now, the ending of this chapter is really more of Arise telling the X-Men that he's going to leave their care, that he's going to adventure around the world to kind of get a better understanding about how the world is like. Because remember, when it comes to the humans that he had created in the Mojoverse, it was based off us, we the humans here on the Earth reality. And so he kind of understand where he went wrong when it came to him creating his people and how it affected his world, the Mojo world. And so he's going out there to explore it to hopefully figure out the right way to fix his world by using our world. Now, the next chapter is going to be X Factor Annual number 7. Now, this annual or this chapter is a spiral chapter, and this is where we're going to actually talk about the character. But before we are able to properly dive into the actual origin of the character, I kind of want to jump back over to Mojo, because now he's back to being the main focus of the story just for this chapter, because now he found out what our mysterious character did in the last chapter, and he's kind of worried about the idea that other shows on his network that's not his are getting better ratings than his own show. But again, he's also still trying to get Arise back into his reality, the Mojoverse. And so he does talk to his assistant one more time, and he does say, you know what, it's time for us to use one of our agents on Earth. Now really, they only have one, and that would be Spyro. And so it's really him saying, okay, you know what, it's time for me to go ahead and contact her and tell her to go ahead and do the job. Now, we can kind of go ahead and jump into the actual origin of Spyro, because it's going to be very important for the connection she has with Arise. So diving into the actual origin of Spyro, we got to jump back to Longshot issue number 1. Here's the reason why, because yes, she did first appear there, but the future of Spyro all begins in the past with Longshot. So in the past, she met Longshot when she was just a regular woman, but then out of nowhere, she was attacked by her future self. Now, the reason why she was attacked by her future self is because Mojo knows if he's able to send Spyro from the future back in time to attack her past self, it is going to set in motion the whole process of her actual origin. And so after being attacked by her future self, she met Longshot, they fell in love, but Longshot wanted to go back to his world, the Mojo world, to basically free his people, to be that Messiah. Now, as we all know, he will constantly fail as their Messiah. And so one of the times he did fail, he was with Rita, aka Spiral. And when he failed, Mojo was able to capture both of them, but he mind wiped Longshot to make sure that he had completely forgot about Rita, the past version of Spiral. Now, after doing that, he let Longshot go. Really, Longshot escaped, but he kept Rita behind and continued to torture her over and over and over again. Now, while torturing her, you did have Mojo force Arise to do experiments on her. Now, Arise was able to give her some extra arms. Now, most of the arms she does have, they're cybernetic, but he also taught her the ability to look into other dimensions that are technically used for time traveling or being used to teleport to other dimensions, but also he taught her dark magic. Now, after a while being tortured, but also being changed into a new character, you then have Mojo send her back in time to make sure her past self will go through the same thing she did to make sure Spiral actually exists. And so she is technically a paradox. Now, that is why I say she has a huge connection to Arise, because Arise was forced by Mojo to do things to Spiral to turn to the character we all know and kind of love. Now, like I said in the early part of this video, this crossover did use 4 different annuals, and we're already done with the X-Men. So now we have to jump over to X-Factor. Now, X-Factor is being led by Havoc, but also X-Factor is a government team, because around this time in Marvel Comics, you had the American government wanting to kind of build relations with the mutant race. And so they're using X-Factor as a way to kind of build those relations between the two different parties, the government, but also the mutant race. Now, they're being led and kind of controlled by Val Cooper. Now, Val Cooper, she had worked next to the president, kind of doing all different superhuman being things happening in America. But with her being in charge of X-Factor, she does have a new mission for our heroes, to go after Spiral. And here's the reason why. Because Spiral was part of a different team in Marvel Comics in the 80s called Freedom Force. Now, Freedom Force was the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but they were kind of given a second chance by the government if they work for the government and kind of go after different people, mostly mutants, as a way to be forgiven for their crimes. Now, Spiral was kind of joined on the team, not joined, she was kind of put on the team by Val Cooper. But Val got word that Spiral has been on a rampage recently, and so she wanted to use X-Factor to kind of deal with her past mistakes, to kind of deal with Spiral. Now, I want to jump back over to Arise. Here's the reason why. So you have Arise kind of just watching different channels and different stuff on TV to kind of get a better idea of what this world is truly like, because we do learn that why the Spineless Ones, the race that Mojo belongs to, had gone crazy in that other reality, because they are receiving signals from the main Marvel universe. And with those signals going into the Mojoverse, it kind of led into the actual Spineless Ones going crazy. And so for Arise, what he wants to do is learn everything he can about this world, but to also take back enough footage to kind of show both sides, the humans of the Mojoverse, but also the Spineless Ones, to kind of show them what it's like to be free, what it's like to be a normal person. He's also trying his best to control the signals that are being sent from Earth over to the Mojoverse to kind of help relax the minds of the Spineless Ones. Now, I want to jump over to Spiral. Now, the reason why, because Spiral got word, thanks to Mojo, that basically Arise is on Earth. Now, like I said earlier, Arise was the person who was technically forced to do experiments on her. But the problem is Spiral has no idea that he was actually forced to do those experiments. To her, it's kind of like, no, he wanted to do it to her. He wanted to change her. He wanted to make her different for his own personal reasons. And so once she got word that he was on Earth, she was instantly down with the idea of trying to find him and most likely kill him off. If not kill him, at least bring him back over to Mojo. Now, for X Factor, they're going after Spiral because they got word, really Val Cooper got word, that she has gone on a rampage across the world or across a certain area. They don't actually know what's going on with her or why she has gone on this rampage, but we as the readers, we know why, because she's going after Arise. And so once you have X Factor arrive at a certain location, they do get word that she was there and she was looking for the stranger. They get the word from the people in this nearby village that Arise was staying at. And so once they find out that she was there and she's going after somebody else, and we know it is Arise, you have X Factor head straight over there to hopefully find her and hopefully stop her. Now, once you do have X Factor being able to actually catch up to Spiral and they see she's trying to kill off Arise, we do learn that she's not trying to kill off Arise for Mojo, she's trying to kill off Arise for herself. Let me explain. You see, for Spiral, she's from the future. She's from 100 years in the future in Mojo's world. And so in that reality, she was already tortured, used for different kinds of experiments, but also being changed into Spiral, all done by Arise. And so with her being here on Earth, it's the present day, but it's her past. And so she's kind of hoping if she kills off Arise right now, that means he will not be in her future, meaning that he will not be there to torture her, to do experiments on her, to change her. And most likely she's hoping to break this cycle so that her past self can just be a regular woman. Now also, she's going after Arise because he was the one that changed her. But to her, she believes that he did it on purpose. But he tells her, like, no, you don't understand. Like, I was actually forced to do those things to you, but in my time, at this point in time, they haven't happened yet, which means I haven't met you yet. I haven't done things to you yet. So right now, you're trying to kill off a man who's not actually guilty because he has not committed those crimes yet. He has not evolved her yet in Mojo's world. She's still being held there in that world right now, just as a prisoner. And so when he comes to her and she's telling him everything he has done to her, he is so confused. Now, X Factor, they do arrive and they do fight against her. And they kind of realize that maybe Spiral is not completely evil. And the reason why, because she's not trying to kill them. Like, really, she's holding back. Now, at the end of this section, you have Arise realize that maybe it's time for him to go back to Mojo's world. He has learned a lot about this reality, but also he kind of feels like it's time for him to try once again to change Mojo world, but hopefully with the help of Spiral. Now, before she does leave, she tells our heroes who is actually the savior from her future, because we do learn that 100 years in the future, somebody was able to remove Mojo, but to also make sure none of the spineless ones were able to take his place. And she tells us it is Shatterstar. Now, Shatterstar is going to make things even more complicated when it comes to the character of Longshot, but also Dazzler and Arise and also Spiral. But Shatterstar is from the future of Mojo's world. We were told that at the tail end of New Mutants leading into X-Force. Now, the final chapter does take place in X-Force Annual #1. Now, for me personally, this chapter is the weakest chapter, but not like it actually sucks. It's just that for me, it's the whole idea of this chapter taking place in a future that could most likely not even happen, because with comics, the future can always change because events happening in the past. And so X-Force Annual #1 does take place in the far future, both on Earth, but also in Mojo's world, in Mojoverse as well. Because when we jump over to the Mojoverse, we learn that Mojo is no longer the ruler of this world. Really, there were other Mojos after him, 2, 3, 4, and even 5. But at this point in time, the actual leader of Mojo World is Shatterstar. Now, Shatterstar, we're still learning about the character over in X-Force Comics. All we know is that he's from the future from Mojo World or Mojo Verse and came back in time to the Earth reality to find the X-Men, to have the X-Men help him take down Mojo in his reality. Now, like I said though, that's all we know. But in this chapter, apparently this takes place after all those events. So by this point, the man is already the ruler of Mojo Verse. He was able to take down Mojo. Now, like I said, this chapter does take place both in the future of Earth, but also the Mojo Verse as well, because when we jump over to Earth, we do pick up with Arise, who is a whole lot older, but apparently he's came to Earth for a mission to find X-Force. Now, with this being the future, we're not going to have the same X-Force we've seen in the X-Force comics. So, for example, the leader of X-Force is actually Cannonball Sam, but he does have some new members on his team, like Siren. She's still there as well, so I guess you have two people who were on X-Force originally before this future story. But you also have Power Packs, which is Frankie Power from the Power Pack group. You also have Darkchild, Ileana, and you have Cyberlock. Now, Cyberlock is actually Cypher and Warlock who have merged together. And you have Sunspot. Now, if you've seen our X-Force videos, Sunspot had just joined X-Force at the very end of issue number 15. Right before we dive into the X-Cutioner Song crossover. So he just joined, so I guess you can say this team is half old, half new. Either way, this is your future version of X-Force, and when they do see Arise, at first they don't recognize him because they have not seen him in a good amount of years, but they do fight against him and the forces he brought with him. Now, I want to say that some of the people who came with him is actually spineless ones, and it kind of shows that something went wrong once they were able, the humans were able to overthrow the spineless ones and actually rule over the Mojo world. Because once you have our heroes realize it's Arise, he comes to them with a whole lot of information about what happened on Mojo World. Now, when it comes to Arise, he does tell us what happened after he had left at the end of the last chapter. So for me, it does kind of take place way after X-Men issue number 10 and 11, where we are technically told that after he had went back to Mojo's world alongside with Spiral, he was able to get help from the X-Men, but also get help from Longshot as well, the Messiah, to fight against Mojo and Mojo 2, because remember, in X-Men issue number 10 and 11, we saw Mojo 2 take over Mojo World because Mojo 1 had just disappeared. And so we're being told that after that, Mojo 2 also had to be taken down as well. Now, we kind of jump forward to Mojo 5, and we are kind of told that apparently 10 years before this moment right here, X-Force, that was still being led by Cable, led a small team of people to remove Mojo 5 alongside with Shatterstar and a few other members of X-Force. But then we're told that Cable wanted Shatterstar to be the actual leader, the actual ruler of Mojo World. So now we kind of know how Shatterstar got put in that position. But apparently with Shatterstar being there, he's more like a dictator, a rough one, almost like Mojo. And so for Arise, he was kind of hoping that when the human race over in Mojo World finally took over that world, that there'll be no more battles, no more war, no more evil king. But the problem is Shatterstar had just replaced, well, Mojo 5 at that time. And so for Cannonball, he kind of realized what Arise is saying here, saying that maybe it's not right for one man to rule over both races, the humans, but also the spineless ones. And so it's them saying maybe it's time for a new kind of government where the people can actually choose their leader. Now, we kind of learned why Shatterstar had technically failed as the leader of Mojo World. And the reason why, because, well, you had someone known as a scheduler. Now, the scheduler is the one who kind of ran all the schedules for the programs, for the networks, where you had the people in Mojo World, watching their shows. So they know, like, hey, if I'm on this channel, I'm going to watch this show. I'm on this channel, it's going to be that show. It was all up to him. Now, with that being said, the scheduler wanted to make sure that the world kind of ran the same way the spineless ones did, but now with the humans being in charge. Now, here's the catch. Because you do have the story kind of wrap up very quickly, unfortunately, where we're not really able to explore this future, but we are told that Shatterstar kind of realized that he had failed as a ruler of this world, that he kind of lost his ways. Now, for Cannonball of the Future, he tells us that the reason why Shatterstar kind of failed at this future being a ruler is because his only example of a leader was Cable. And is Cannonball saying Cable's not a good role model, so you kind of failed there. But it's also Shatterstar kind of realizing that maybe it's time for a new government in this world. So the book really does kind of wrap up very quickly, where you have Shatterstar being able to work with X-Force, work with Arise to take down the scheduler, who was kind of being the mastermind behind everything in this chapter. But once they're able to get rid of him, you have everyone try to establish now this new government. Now, for me, it's kind of like saying, we're going to see Longshot constantly failed in X-Men comics, and also Shatterstar as well, until we actually reach this point right here, where he's able to actually become a not a good ruler, an evil ruler, and then learn from his mistakes to try to bring in a new government. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but now we have reached a point where we are beginning to wind down our coverage over the X-Men. What I mean is that we are about to jump into the next X-Men crossover that we have to talk about, and that will be the X-Cutioner Song. Now, this was a massive crossover that Marvel did right after Jim Lee had left. Let me explain. So when it came to the X-Men in the early 1990s, they were really popular. You had a lot of different X titles: X-Factor, X-Force, Excalibur, but you had 2 X-Men books. And the reason why, because the original X-Factor team had rejoined the X-Men. When that happened, well, Charles had 14 different X-Men at his house. He said, you know what? I can go ahead and put you guys in 2 different teams, Gold Team and Blue Team. Now, if you read Uncanny X-Men, you were following Storm Team, better known as Gold Team. But if you're reading a book called just X-Men, well, you were following the Blue Team that was being led by Cyclops. 2 different teams. Now, here's the big thing though. When it came to the X-Men book, it was actually launched by Jim Lee and Chris Claremont. But after the first 3 issues, Chris left, and then Jim Lee was able to take over the book as writer and artist. But after issue number 11, he also left to go help create Image Comics. And so it left the door open for somebody else to come in and write the X-Men. And that was Fabian Nicieza. And I really hope I pronounced his last name correctly. I feel like I always just mess up his last name. But for Fabian, he was the new writer of the X-Men, the main writer now. He did write a few X-Men stories in the past before this point. Prime example is Kings of Pain and also Shattershot. But this is his time to take over completely. And now the X-Men were under his control. Now for Fabian, he was beginning to kind of lay down the groundwork of the idea of the father of Charles Xavier having a dark secret. And this leads into the Xavier file. Now, before we are able to actually jump into the dark secrets of Charles Xavier's father, but also the Xavier file, I kind of want to jump over to X-Men issue number 12, the opening pages for today's story arc, because we actually pick up with a character known as Carter Reiking. Now, Carter Reiking has been living in a hospital called the Reiking Hospital. It was named after his father. Now, for Carter, we do learn that he is a mutant, and he has the ability to, well, generate plasma inside his body, but he needs special kind of gear if he wants to shoot that plasma as some kind of energy blast. Now, for Carter, we do learn that he has been locked up in this hospital for many years, and sometimes he'll try to escape, but usually he is unable to escape because the staff is there to shut him down when he tries to escape. But now they're wondering why this last time he went so crazy powerful, like what actually set him off. And we do learn that his father, Alexander Reiking, had just died, and Carter had just learned that his father had just died. Now, here's the catch. Alexander used to work very close to Brian Xavier, the father of Charles Xavier. But now we jump over to the X-Men. Now, really, the next few pages are just establishing a few things. Like, for example, the whole idea that Rogue and Gambit do have feelings for one another. But the big problem is that, well, Rogue cannot be touched. But for Gambit, he's really trying his best to be with her. Also, let's not forget that in a previous story arc, we had just learned that Gambit was married. Now, in his defense, he did run away from his wife as a way to protect her, and he thought he could never go back to her. But also, in that previous story arc, his previous wife had died. And so for Gambit, it's kind of like, listen, I'm technically single again, which means that you and me, Rogue, can possibly be together now. But again, the big problem is they cannot touch because of Rogue's powers. We are also setting up the idea that Psylocke is not going to be here for this story arc. And the reason why, because she has to go see her brother over in Great Britain, which means that once we go over to Excalibur, we're going to see Psylocke teaming up with the Excalibur team down the road. And Beast is going to be the one to drive her over to the airport. Now, as they drive off, we're also establishing that Cyclops is actually thinking about cheating on Jean Grey with Psylocke. Like, if you saw my lives the last few weeks, y'all should know that I'm not really the biggest fan of Cyclops, and this is another reason why. Because this man is actually thinking of possibly leaving Jean Grey for Psylocke. But now we jump over to Jubilee, who's going through a Danger Room session. Now, this story arc also reminds us that, well, Jubilee may not be a well-established member of the X-Men, because in an earlier story arc where you have the X-Men team up with Ghost Rider, you have Beast say like, hey, Jubilee is not an X-Men yet. She's not covered in our insurance plan. And so we're kind of left to believe that even though Jubilee has been on a lot of missions, she's not an established member of the team just yet. But you do have Charles putting her through a Danger Room session. But in the middle of that session, you have Wolverine appear, very upset at Charles Xavier because he just found the Xavier file, and he believes that that file may have connections to his past. And let's not forget that the 1990s, Marvel was trying their best to establish the actual origin of Wolverine. Now, this is where we dive into the Xavier file, but not completely here. So for the Xavier file, we do learn that it's information about Brian Xavier, the father of Charles Xavier. But apparently this information takes place before Charles was born, but after Charles was born as well. But here's the big problem though. Charles has not been able to actually dive deep through all the different pieces of the file yet. But for Wolverine, while using the computer at the school of Charles Xavier, he found the Xavier file. And to him, he feels like the Xavier file may have some connections over to his past. And so he's kind of upset that Charles did not hand over the Xavier file. But for Xavier, Charles Xavier, he's kind of like, dude, I have not gone through that file properly yet to kind of figure out what is it all about. All I know is that it contains information about my father. Until I am able to actually sit down and go through it, I can't really give it over to you. And really, we're unable to build connections from my father's past to your past. Now, I want to jump back over to Carter because we do establish that Carter is able to finally escape from the hospital. And this time, when he does escape, he kills all the different staff members who were there trying to contain him. But his goal now is to make sure that his father's secret and other people who had worked with him, their secrets are also be released to the rest of the world, to the public. But also want to make sure that Charles Xavier knows the actual past of his father. Now, I want to jump over to Charles Xavier and Wolverine for a brief moment. Here's the reason why. So for Charles Xavier, he tells us that he only received the Xavier file 6 weeks ago. The problem is that he has no idea who gave him the file in the first place. Now, he was able to kind of look through some pieces of the information in the file, and he did learn that apparently his father worked for the government, but apparently they were studying genetic mutation. Of course, we're talking about mutants. Now, when it came to Charles' father, he died when Charles was 9 years old. But apparently Brian died in an accident at a facility called Alamogordo. And so for Charles Xavier, if they want any kind of information, they have to go there maybe. But while talking to Wolverine, he sees a news update about the funeral for Alexander Reiking. And Charles remembers Alexander because he worked very close to his father, Brian Xavier. Now, I want to jump over to Charles Xavier. And you have Charles Xavier going over to the funeral for Alexander Reiking. Now, for Charles, he has not seen Alexander Reiking since he was 9 years old after his father had died. But for Charles, this is him just trying to hopefully find any kind of piece of information about his father and his past. But here's the problem. Carter arrives. Now, for Carter, like I said earlier, he's trying to establish with the public that his father, Alexander, was not a good man, that Alexander was actually a very bad man. Now, once you have Carter arrive, you have Charles being able to connect his mind to Carter's mind, where you have Carter begin to have talks with Charles in their minds. And we do learn that Carter was the one who sent Charles Xavier the file, the Xavier file. And the reason why, because Carter said, Xavier, you should want to know about your father's past. And let me tell you right now, your father and my father had worked together. Now for Charles, he's right. He wants to know more about his father's past. But he also tells Carter, we're not going to get any kind of piece of information about your father here at his grave. Like, we have to go somewhere else. And for Carter, he knows where to go. The Alamogordo facility, the same place where Brian Xavier had his accident that had apparently killed him. But for Carter, he said, it all began there. It all ended there for me as well. And so you have Carter pick up Charles and they fly away. Now, with Charles Xavier being taken away by Carter, you then have Val Cooper call up the X-Men to inform them what had happened. Now, remember, Val Cooper works for the government, and really, she has her own X team, and that would be X Factor. And so it's her saying like, hey guys, listen, your guy, Charles, was just taken away by this Carter Reiking guy. Now, for the X-Men, they already know where Carter had taken Charles to. Alamogordo. And so you have the X-Men about to head over there right now. Now for Val, she cannot understand why in the world that Carter would take Charles there. And you have the X-Men say, like, listen, the reason why? Because Charles' father used to work there, and so did Alexander Reiking. But apparently, there could be more information behind that place. Now, for Val, she said, listen, I work for the government. And even with that kind of power, I don't have any kind of information about that facility, which means that it had to go deep, deep into the government where she does not have the clearance to look at those kind of files. Either way, you do have the X-Men begin to head over there to go save their boss, Charles Xavier. Now, this is where I want you guys to kind of jump back to our previous X-Men video. Here's the reason why. So, in our previous X-Men video, we had actually talked about Alexander Reiking before, because remember, we had a story where you had the X-Men fighting against Mojo in the Mojoverse. We had a backup story where you had Maverick go after Alexander Reiking, and you had Maverick being able to kill off Alexander Reiking. And so the death of Alexander is all Maverick's fault, which then led to Carter being able to finally break free from Reiking Hospital. So now you should know what actually happened to Alexander Reiking, how he died. It was back in our last video when we covered that backup story that involved Maverick. But getting back on track, we do jump over to X-Men issue number 13. Now, with the 13th issue, we do learn that Carter and also Charles Xavier had arrived at the Alamogordo facility. Now, like I said earlier, this facility has been abandoned for years. I'm talking about it's been quiet for a very long time, ever since the incident that had killed Charles Xavier's father, Brian. Now, here's the catch. You see, we had learned in the past that, well, Brian Xavier had died by the hands of Kurt Marco, the father to the Juggernaut, the stepfather to Charles Xavier. But you have Carter saying, what if I tell you, when it came to your father's death, there's actually more to it? Like, what if it was a cover-up, possibly? Now, you do have Carter being able to blast down a wall that shows a hidden staircase that leads into another part of the facility that was never discovered by the public. And so it's Carter saying, our family secrets are down there. If we go down there, we should be able to learn more about our father's past. Now, while you have Charles and also Carter going deep into the actual facility, the X-Men had arrived to hopefully look for their professor. Now, I want to focus more on Wolverine and Rogue because you have Rogue being very concerned for Wolverine. Now, for Logan, he's kind of like, listen, I don't need your help. I don't need your support. But for Rogue, it's more of like, yes, you do, because out of everybody here, she's the best person who kind of knows what Wolverine is going through. Because remember, in the 1990s, like I said earlier, they were trying to establish the actual origin of Wolverine. But they kept going back and forth telling us that some things were actually true about Logan and some things weren't. And so for Logan, it was kind of messing with his mind. And so for Rogue, she says she understands what it's like to have your mind going all different kinds of directions, because with her ability being able to absorb other people's powers, but also their memories as well, for Rogue, she had a moment in time where she was battling against other personas in her mind. For example, Carol Danvers, when Carol Danvers' persona was able to actually take over the body of Rogue for a short period of time. Either way, it does show that Wolverine and Rogue are really close to one another, and not really in a romantic kind of way, kind of like big brother to little sister or possibly father to daughter. Now, I want to jump back over to the X-Mansion, and the reason why, because we're going to pick up with Jubilee. Now, you have Jubilee being left behind at the X-Mansion, but she realized that somebody is trying to call the X-Mansion, and that would be Cannonball. Now, remember, Cannonball is working with X-Force. Now, for Charles Xavier and the X-Men, they don't really like X-Force because X-Force is, well, a very extreme group of characters who are not afraid to kill people. And for Charles, that is never okay. But Cannonball was apparently calling Charles for some kind of strange reason. Now, you would think he'll leave a message behind for Jubilee to give to Charles, but he says, no, I'll just call back later, and hangs up just like that. Now, there are two characters I do want to talk about that we have not talked about in a very long time, really, when it comes to our coverage over the X-Men. That'll be Fire Fist and also Skid. Now, remember, Fire Fist and Skid were technically trainees for the original X Factor team, but also after they had left X Factor, they kind of joined the New Mutants for a very short period of time. But then they were kind of forced to join the Mutant Liberation Front that's being led by Strife. And remember, when it comes to that group, they're telling the public that they're going around attacking different government facilities as a way to make sure the government will not try to go after the mutants or hold mutants against their wills. Now, we also learned that Strife has some other plans down the road, but he also looks just like Cable. Now, with all that information, he had Fire Fist and Skid go get a piece of art that kind of shows the face of Apocalypse. And apparently for Strife, it's time for him to get his revenge against get his revenge against Apocalypse for what he has done to him in the past. Now, the ending of this book does wrap up very quickly here as we jump back over to the X-Men fighting against Carter Reiking. Now, like I said earlier, for Carter Reiking, he does have the ability to generate plasma energy. But here's the big catch though. He needs a special kind of mechanism that really helps him channel that power correctly. But if he does not have that special kind of mechanism around him, well, unfortunately, he will not be able to properly shoot the energy as a blast towards his foes. And so for the X-Men, while you have the X-Men battling against him, Cyclops is able to damage that special mechanism. And so Carter is no longer able to properly shoot his energy blast. And it does cause a small explosion in the facility, knocking him out. Now for Logan, he still wants answers from Carter, but you have Charles Xavier say, listen, we're not going to get any kind of information here from this place because this place is completely dead. If we want to be able to get any kind of piece of information about your past or my father's past, we have to go to other places where my father had possibly lived to hopefully get the right things we need to know about what he was working on and also maybe more secrets of Logan's past. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.